There are questions that time has not been able to answer. Not even the oldest archives, forgotten temples, or bones buried in the ground have been able to provide an answer. Why did entire civilizations disappear without a trace? What secrets lie hidden in the ruins that no one has been able to decipher? And why do some objects as old as man himself seem to defy all known logic? Throughout history, there have been discoveries that baffle scientists, manuscripts written in impossible languages, monuments built with technologies that should not have existed, places marked by silence, by absence, by the inexplicable. And each of these enigmas not only challenges our understanding of the past, but also calls into question what we think we know about the present. Today we delve into that dark corner of history where answers fade away and only shadows remain. So sit back, take a deep breath, and get ready for a journey into the unknown, because these are the stories that the world has not yet been able to explain. In the heart of ancient Athens, under the relentless sun of Latica and among the dry, worn-out ruins of the Agora, lies one of the most enigmatic altars of the classical world, the altar of the 12 gods. Today, its remains barely protrude from the modern pavement, almost invisible among the hurried footsteps of those who walk through the square. But more than 2,500 years ago, this place marked something much deeper than a simple religious gathering place. It was the symbolic center of Athens, the kilometer zero of the Hellenic world. From here, all distances were measured, and from here also began some of the oldest stories of faith, power, and mystery built around 522 BC. By Pisistratus, the young member of one of the most influential families in the city, this altar was dedicated to the 12 main deities of the Olympian pantheon: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, and Styx. Together, these gods represented the order of the cosmos, the balance between natural and human forces. But why bring them all together on a single altar? What was the purpose of this exact spot? Was it just a place of worship, or something more? Ancient accounts describe the altar as a refuge, a sanctuary where anyone could go to seek asylum. Criminals, slaves, even persecuted citizens could touch this altar and claim divine protection. It was an inviolable space, a point of intersection between human justice and the will of the gods. However, there are details that do not quite fit. In the archaeological remains discovered in the mid-20th century, experts found a peculiar absence. There was no evidence of large statues, no complete inscriptions, no significant remains of offerings, just a rectangular stone base surrounded by a low fence, sober, minimalist, strangely silent for the spiritual epicenter of one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. Was it deliberately destroyed, or did its design serve a more esoteric purpose? Some researchers have suggested that the altar may have been much more than a religious space. Perhaps it functioned as a kind of energy point, a symbolic center linked to astronomical or geometric practices that we do not fully understand today. The layout of some Athenian temples seems to hint at connecting lines that converge at this very spot. Coincidence? Architectural coincidence, or lost knowledge? Others point to an even deeper symbolism. In many ancient cultures, the number 12 is not arbitrary. It represents cycles, wholeness, cosmic balance, the 12 months of the year, the 12 phases of the moon, the 12 signs of the zodiac. And if the altar of the 12 gods was not simply a representation of Olympus, but a way of anchoring the celestial order on earth, a kind of sacred map, a reflection of the universe projected in stone. Over the centuries, the altar was forgotten, buried under layers of history, wars, empires. Its exact location was a subject of debate among archaeologists until 1891, when they stumbled upon a fragment of an inscription that clearly mentioned its existence. But it was not until 1934, during the expansion of the Athens electric train, that the most solid remains appeared. It was an uncomfortable discovery. Urban plans clashed with millennia of history, and, as so often happens, it was decided to build over it. Today, Part of the altar remains under the train tracks. It is a symbolic image, modernity circulating without, stopping over the fragments of an ancient world that still holds its secrets. And although the altar no longer serves its original purpose, its mystery remains. We do not know for certain how the rituals were performed, what kind of ceremonies took place, or whether God had his own space within the enclosure. The ancient texts are vague, the ruins silent. Was this place a simple urban marker, an expression of collective faith, or perhaps a center of ritual power whose true meaning has been lost in time? What we do know is that something drew the ancient Athenians to this exact spot, something that deserved to be the spiritual heart of their city. Perhaps it was devotion, perhaps it was fear, or perhaps it was a knowledge that we have completely forgotten over the centuries. After all, how many more places like this lie hidden beneath modern cities, waiting to be rediscovered? History does not always reveal itself clearly. Sometimes it offers us only fragments, hints, unanswered questions. And the altar of the 12 gods is one of those whispers from the past, an echo that still resonates in the marble and the earth. Will we continue to walk over it without looking, or will we one day discover what it really meant? Let's continue exploring. And while the stones of Athens held the secrets of the ancient gods hundreds of miles to the north, another enigma lay not in marble, but between pages covered with symbols and silence. A dark, dense, hermetic book, a codex that has puzzled philologists, historians, and cryptographers for generations. We now move to Lorsch, a small German town that was an important monastic center of the Holy Roman Empire in the Middle Ages. There, among the shelves of what was once one of the most influential libraries in the Christian world, a manuscript appeared that is unlike any other, the Lombard Codex of Lorsch. At first glance, it looks like just another religious book. Worn leather, yellowed parchment pages, calligraphy carefully traced by expert hands. But as soon as you stop to read, the uncertainty begins. The language in which it is written does not quite fit. For years, it was believed to be late Latin or perhaps a primitive form of Old High German. But the grammatical patterns and syntax do not quite add up. Some words do not exist in any other known document, while others seem to have been invented. We are faced with a lost dialect, a coded language, or perhaps something more intentionally hidden. The codex contains fragments of psalms, hymns, and religious formulas, yes, but also obscure, almost poetic passages that do not refer to any clear Christian tradition. Some experts have suggested that it could be a transitional work between paganism and Christianity, written at a time when the ancient Germanic gods still whispered in the shadows of the forest. Others believe that it was deliberately created as a form of restricted knowledge, accessible only to a cultured elite within the monastery. Lorsch was not just any place. In its heyday, between the 10th and 12th centuries, it was a leading intellectual center. Classical, religious, and scientific texts were copied, translated, and preserved there. But also, according to some researchers, writings considered too dangerous or heretical to circulate freely were protected there. Could the Lombard Codex be one of those texts? A compendium of ancient knowledge disguised as Christian liturgy. A particularly intriguing theory holds that the Codex was not written to be read aloud, but to be deciphered in private. Its short, broken sentences seem more designed to be visualized than understood in a linear fashion. Some scholars have even suggested that it contains hidden references to astronomical cycles, as if the text also functioned as a ritual calendar. We're looking at a cult book, a guide for initiates. Over the centuries, the manuscript has changed hands numerous times. Part of it was found in the Vatican Apostolic Library. Another section is in Vienna, and scattered fragments have appeared in other private collections. This fragmentation has made it even more difficult to study, as if the codex itself refused to be understood in its entirety. And then the inevitable question arises. Who wrote it? There is no known author, no signature, no clue that allows it to be attributed with certainty to a specific person or group. Some link it to the Benedictine monks of Lorsch. others to ancient Lombard scribes, who would have preserved their traditions after the fall of their kingdom. But no theory stands out with definitive force. Every attempt at classification stumbles upon new anomalies. The calligraphy of the Codex is also a disturbing element. In some passages, the letters appear deliberately distorted, as if hiding visual clues. In others, there are symbols that do not correspond to any known alphabet. Some resemble runes, others evoke Oriental characters, which has given rise to the most speculative interpretations. Foreign influences, knowledge brought by travelers, or simple decorations that have been misinterpreted. And yet, the most disconcerting thing is not what the Codex shows, but what it hints at, because there are fragments of the text that seem to speak of hidden knowledge, of invisible structures that govern the world, of forgotten names and ceremonies that do not appear in any other ecclesiastical record. And one cannot help but wonder, is it possible that this seemingly harmless manuscript is actually a remnant of an older, pre-Christian tradition, carefully camouflaged to survive censorship? Today, the Lombard Codex remains an object of fascination and frustration. Scans, chemical analyses of the parchment, and exhaustive philological studies have been carried out, and yet its true purpose remains elusive. It is as if the book does not want to reveal its secret entirely, as if it can only be understood from a perspective that we have already lost. In a world where most ancient texts have been classified, translated, and contextualized, this codex resists, and in its resistance it becomes a symbol of everything we do not yet know, of everything that lies hidden between the lines of written history. What if this book is not incomplete, but rather we are the ones who no longer have the keys to read it? And while Lore's manuscript keeps its secrets between lines we can no longer decipher, on the other side of the ocean, in the green depths of Central America, the mystery manifests itself in another form, not in words, but in stone, not in encrypted texts, but in forms so perfect that they defy the passage of time and the logic of their creation. In southern Costa Rica, between the plains of the Diquis Delta and the rainforests of the OSA region, lie stone spheres so perfectly carved that they appear to have been sculpted by technology far more advanced than one would expect from pre-Columbian societies. These are the Diquis spheres. Some lie alone, isolated, half buried in the ground. Others are grouped together with an unsettling symmetry, aligned with a care that suggests a deeper intention. Some are small, barely 20 centimeters in diameter, while others reach 25 meters and weigh an estimated 15 tons. What exactly were they? Monuments, astronomical markers, symbols of power, ritual toys. To this day, no one knows for sure. They were discovered in the early 20th century when American banana companies began to exploit the region. During deforestation, workers came across these strange round shapes, protruding from the roots and mud. Many were destroyed, moved, or even dynamited in an attempt to find treasures inside, but all they contained was silence. They are mainly made of granodiorite, an extremely hard rock. Their manufacture poses a remarkable technical challenge. No metal tools or sophisticated polishing methods were documented in the region at the time of their creation. And yet, the degree of sphericity of some of them is so precise that it can only be compared to modern techniques. According to analyses carried out by archaeologists, the spheres were probably carved between 400 and 1500 AD by the indigenous peoples of the Diquis culture. However, the available oral and mythological records offer no clear references. There are no texts or cave paintings to explain them. All that remains are the spheres and the mystery. How was such a precise shape achieved with rudimentary tools? How were these masses of stone transported without the use of wheels or pack animals? Why were some found perfectly aligned with astronomical phenomena, such as the solstices and equinoxes? Some researchers have suggested that they may have functioned as a kind of solar calendar. Others believe they were status symbols, or representations of celestial bodies, such as planets or stars. But there are also less conventional theories, including the idea that the spheres were part of a broader geometric or cosmological knowledge, a kind of symbolic language that has been lost. Some link them to lost civilizations or even to contact with cultures from other continents. Some suggest parallels with European megaliths, such as Stonehenge or the Nazca Lines in Peru. Exaggerated, perhaps, but the questions remain. Why invest so many resources in carving stones so perfectly without leaving any explanation? Why the insistence on the sphere, a geometric figure that requires a remarkable level of mathematical understanding? And above all, why did this knowledge disappear without a trace? The truth is that, despite advances in Costa Rican archaeology, the exact purpose of these structures is still unknown. Their distribution across the landscape seems to follow patterns, but many have been altered. Having been moved from their original positions, it is almost impossible to reconstruct the complete arrangement of the spheres in the context in which they were created. And here comes another disturbing element. The vast majority of the spheres were found without any inscriptions, engravings, symbols, or marks indicating authorship or function. It is as if their silence were part of their message. In recent decades, attempts have been made to preserve what remains of the original collection. Some spheres have been declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Others have been taken to museums, public squares, and government buildings. And although they are now part of Costa Rica's national imagination, the enigma remains intact. In a world where almost everything can be traced, measured, and explained, the deepest spheres resist. Their serene presence in the middle of the tropics is an invitation to humility. They remind us that there was a time not so long ago when knowledge was transmitted in other ways, and that not everything that existed left its history written on paper. Perhaps behind these round, silent shapes lies a worldview that we no longer understand, a message carved in stone that needs no words, an echo of a civilization that spoke with geometry and looked to the sky for answers. And if the spheres are not there to be understood, but to ask us questions, what if the Diki spheres spoke to us silently from the jungle, with perfect shapes that defy all logic? The next enigma takes us to a very different landscape, a place where the dry heat of the desert and the ruins of ancient empires mark every corner, a forgotten corner of North Africa, Tuz. There, among the sands and dusty hills of the Tetewan region, stands an ancient carved stone, little known and rarely mentioned outside specialized archaeological circles. An inscription whose interpretation has challenged linguists. For decades, the enigmatic inscription of Aya Sephora. At first glance, it may seem like just another stone slab eroded by time and wind. But upon closer inspection, one discovers a set of perfectly engraved signs, distributed with a strange harmony across the surface. It is not Latin or Phoenician, nor any known Punic or Berber language. The characters do not correspond to any ancient Mediterranean alphabet, and yet their strokes seem deliberate, refined, almost ceremonial. It was discovered by chance in the late 19th century during a French expedition in search of Roman remains. But instead of a classical inscription, archaeologists found this cryptic text that seemed to come from a completely unknown culture. Since then, it has been the subject of intermittent study, but never fully understood. Who were the authors of this message, and what were they trying to convey? Some specialists have suggested that it is a very ancient form of writing, Livico-Berever, perhaps a local variant lost centuries ago. Others believe that it could represent a ceremonial language used only in religious or funerary contexts, whose grammar and vocabulary were never recorded in writing in other sources. But none of these hypotheses has been confirmed with certainty. For us, the most puzzling thing is that the stone was not found in a temple or in a tomb or near a known city. It was alone, half buried, with no other ruins nearby that could provide clues about its context, as if it had been placed there intentionally, as if someone wanted it to remain hidden until the time came for it to be discovered. Over time, the name Iosophora was adopted by researchers in reference to the species of wild tree that grows near the place where the inscription was found. But even that name is uncertain. Some consider it a translation error or a forced Latinization that attempts to give meaning to what in reality has none. And what if the text is not meant to be read in our language? What if its logic responds to a system completely foreign to the linguistic structures we know? In the decades following its discovery, several attempts at translation have offered contradictory results. Some believe they see references to local deities, others identify numerical patterns, and some even claim that it could be an encrypted astronomical calendar. A particularly bold interpretation suggests that the text contains ritual formulas linked to a lost desert civilization, a culture that was never recorded by classical historians, but left behind fragments like this, like breadcrumbs forgotten in the dust. The most fascinating thing is that to this day, no one has found another similar inscription, either in Tun in Algeria or in Libya. It is a unique, solitary object, a message without a sender, a language without an echo. It could be a forgery. The possibility has been considered, of course, but analysis of the material and the engraving technique point to genuine antiquity. The patina of the stone, the depth of the grooves, the distribution of the symbols. Everything suggests a manufacture prior to the Roman occupation, possibly from the first millennium BC, at least 2,500 years old. And yet no other artifact in North Africa features such writing. What kind of society creates a writing system and then disappears without a trace? A trace? Some researchers have ventured to compare the signs with other ancient systems, still considered undeciphered. Linear A from Crete, the writing of the Indus Valley, or even the petroglyphs on Easter Island. All of these are examples of languages that, despite modern efforts, remain unfathomable. And if the inscription at Hagia Sophia belongs to the same lineage of forgotten messages, languages that were perhaps never meant to be read, but only to be seen, felt, experienced. A more symbolic theory holds that this inscription is not intended to communicate in the traditional sense, that its message is not in its translation, but in its existence, a silent affirmation of presence, a reminder that before empires, before borders, before written history, there were others, other voices, other ways of understanding the world. Today, the Hagia Sophia stone is in a small regional collection, far from the interest of major museums. Few tourists know about it. Few academics study it. And yet it remains there, silent, intact, perhaps waiting for someone to find the key, because in the middle of the desert, among the scattered remains of what was once a crossroads of cultures, there is still the possibility that we have not seen everything, that there are still messages buried under the dust of time, and that perhaps not all of them were written. And if the inscription of Hagia Sophia left us facing a forgotten language among the sands of Tuez, our next stop takes us across the Atlantic to the heart of the Mexican jungle. There, where thick vegetation hides the remains of ancient empires, a tomb has become one of the greatest enigmas of Mesoamerican archaeology. A burial chamber hidden under a pyramid sealed for more than 1,000 years. The tomb of Pacal the Great. We are in Palenque, in the Mexican state of Chiapas, a majestic Mayan settlement, now silent, but once a center of power, astronomy, and art. And in the center of this complex stands the Temple of Inscriptions, an imposing structure that houses one of the most intriguing burial chambers of the ancient world. Discovered in 1952 by archaeologist Alberto Rullier, the tomb was an unexpected find. No one suspected that a crypt was hidden beneath the pyramid. It is accessed by a narrow internal staircase, descending into the bowels of the stone. The air becomes denser, the silence deeper, and at the end of the descent, a monumental slab carved with almost superhuman detail. On this slab rests the figure of Kinich Yenab Pacal himself, ruler of Palenque in the 1st century AD. Depicted in a dramatic pose, reclining and floating among cosmic symbols, surrounded by snakes, branches of celestial trees, and hieroglyphic inscriptions, he is falling into the underworld, ascending to heaven, connected to a divine machine. The complex and symbolic image has generated decades of debate. The Maya were experts at representing their worldview through art. For them, death was not an end, but a transition. The underworld, known as Xibalba, was not a place of punishment, but a realm of transformation. Many scholars agree that the slab represents precisely that journey. Pakel passing through the layers of the universe, reborn as an ancestral deity. But not everyone sees it that way. In the 1970s, the image caught the public's eye due to a much more speculative theory. Swiss writer Erich von Däniken proposed that the slab showed Pakel as an ancient astronaut, manipulating controls, surrounded by fire and propulsion. What for some was a tree of life, for others was a spaceship. What for archaeologists was religious symbolism, for others was evidence of contact with beings from other worlds. This theory has been rejected by the scientific community, but it has continued to fuel the popular imagination. The ambiguous and fascinating image seems to invite multiple interpretations. Even today, looking at the tombstone is like facing a work of art that seems to contain more than it reveals. Beyond the slab, the tomb itself holds secrets. Pakel's body was found inside a stone sarcophagus accompanied by jade, masks, and ritual offerings. But the most surprising thing was the state of preservation and the wealth of astronomical symbols on the walls of the enclosure. Everything seems to indicate that his burial was not simply a ceremonial act, but part of a carefully planned cosmic ritual. Archaeologists still debate whether the underground passageways surrounding the temple were designed to allow the soul to pass through, or whether they have more complex symbolic functions. Is the Temple of Inscriptions a map of the universe, a funerary guide, or a kind of spiritual machine designed to facilitate the ruler's transformation into divinity? There's another detail that adds to the mystery. Pakel's sarcophagus was covered with a thick layer of cinnabar, a highly toxic red pigment. It was used as a symbol of life, blood, and rebirth, or it had a practical function of preservation. Perhaps both. The construction of the temple also required impressive precision. The axis of the stairway is aligned with solar events, and some inscriptions seem to refer not only to historical events, but also to astronomical dates projected thousands of years into the past and also into the future. Why such an effort to record a cosmic history? Was Pakel just a king or something more? For decades, archaeologists have tried to unravel the multiple layers of meaning in this tomb. And although much of the hieroglyphics have been deciphered, many symbolic connections still elude complete understanding. Even Pakel's exact lineage, his role in the Mayan prophecies, and the relationship between his tomb and other structures in Palenque remain the subject of research. Could Pakel's tomb be just one piece of a much larger puzzle? A part of a cosmological knowledge that the Maya mastered and that we are only beginning to understand. Today, the site remains one of the most visited in the Maya world, but also one of the most shrouded in mystery. There, beneath tons of stone, in the silence of a ceremonial crypt, lies a ruler who perhaps did not want to be remembered only as a man, but as a bridge between this world and another. And if we have not yet learned to read what he really wanted to leave us. And after descending into the depths of Pakel's tomb, where the Maya carved their vision of the cosmos in stone, the journey takes us even further back in time, to a land sacred to many cultures, to the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. There, among the forgotten ruins of ancient empires, lies one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world, the possible existence and mysterious fate of the Tower of Babel. Today, looking at the southern Iraqi horizon, among the red dunes and scattered remains of what was once Babylon, one would not imagine that this place was once dominated by a tower so tall that, according to ancient accounts, it wanted to touch the sky. A mythical construction linked to the pride of men and the confusion of languages. A story that has endured for more than 2 millennia, but whose physical trace remains shrouded in uncertainty. The Bible describes it as a tower built by all of humanity when they still spoke a single language. United by the ambition to reach the sky, they began to erect a monumental structure. But God, according to the story, thwarted their plans by confusing their languages and scattering them across the earth. A parable, a moral warning, or a distant echo of a real event that time transformed into myth. For centuries, the idea that the Tower of Babel may have existed has continued to intrigue historians, archaeologists, and theologians, many of whom have looked to a specific place, the ziggurat of Etemenanke. Temenanke, whose name in Akkadian means the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It was a temple tower dedicated to the god Marduk, the main deity of Babylon. According to cuneiform records, its base measured almost 100 m on each side, and its height would have reached 90 m. An imposing structure for its time, it was made of brick and baked mud, built in stages that ascended toward the sky. Could Etemenanke have been the tower that inspired the biblical legend? Texts from the 6th century BC, especially those of Herodotus and Babylonian reports preserved on tablets, describe a stepped tower located in the center of Babylon. Even Alexander the Great, according to later chronicles, ordered its reconstruction, although this was never completed. Today, on the site where this gigantic structure is supposed to have stood, there are only mounds of adobe, eroded by wind and time. The foundations are buried under layers of sediment, and much of the original material was reused in other constructions over the centuries. The body of the tower seems to have vanished, yet some archaeologists believe that its essence still lies dormant underground. Could the Tower of Babel literally or symbolically be buried somewhere in southern Iraq? Throughout the 20th century, several excavations attempted to find conclusive remains of Etemenanke, but political instability and armed conflict halted many of them. Some evidence has been identified: fragments of inscriptions, wall bases, step platforms, but no definitive proof confirming the complete existence of the structure or its direct link to biblical history. And here the deeper questions begin. Was the Tower of Babel a single building, or was it a symbol of an era when men truly believed they could reach the divine plane through architecture and knowledge? It represents a time when cultures shared a common language, a unified worldview that was later lost. Some researchers suggest that the confusion of languages could refer not to a literal divine punishment, but to the collapse of a multilingual and complex civilization that was unable to maintain its unity, an interpretation that is more anthropological than religious. Others, however, argue that the myth of the tower reflects a deep cultural memory, the trauma of a catastrophe that fragmented human knowledge. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some have linked the tower to forgotten astronomical knowledge, to the idea that the ziggurats were actually elevated observatories that sought to connect heaven and earth. Some have even suggested, although without solid evidence, that these structures were part of a global system of communication or alignment with celestial points similar to other ancient constructions in different parts of the world. A network of towers oriented toward the stars, or simply a reflection of the human desire to understand what lies beyond. Today, walking among the ruins of Babylon is like walking on overlapping layers of history, myth, and oblivion. There, among half-buried stones and crumbling walls, the air still seems charged with unanswered questions. Is the Tower of Babel really buried underground? Or does it live on only in the stories left to us by the ancients as a warning, as a memory, as an aspiration? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where writing, laws, and empires were born, a mystery still beats that we have not yet fully deciphered. And if the ruins of Babylon still echo, with the echoes of a tower that tried to touch the sky, our path now leads us to the Nile, where the sands of the Egyptian desert, always ready to reveal forgotten secrets, preserve the most perplexing ones of the ancient world. A fragile, delicate object, yet deeply disturbing in its content. A papyrus that challenges our ideas about art, morality, and intimacy in ancient Egypt. We delve into the mystery of the Turin erotic papyrus, kept today under strict conservation conditions in the Egyptian Museum in Turin. This papyrus, more than 3,000 years old, measures just over 2 m in length. It looks like a traditional scroll, intertwined yellowish fibers, red and black ink strokes, linear drawings typical of Egyptian iconography, but a closer look reveals that its contents are unusual. In one section, the papyrus shows seemingly humorous scenes with anthropomorphic animals performing human tasks, playing instruments, carrying offerings, or even arguing. This visual satire already breaks with the solemnity expected in ritual documents of the time, but it is in the second part that astonishment turns to discomfort. There, in a direct graphic style, explicit sexual representations appear: naked women, men with disproportionate members, postures that seem more like something out of a manual of provocation than a religious treatise. All this is accompanied by short phrases that are difficult to translate and which some experts interpret as mocking comments, insinuations, or even erotic puns. It is a work of private entertainment, social criticism, a satirical ritual, or perhaps something we have not yet been able to interpret. The papyrus was acquired in the 19th century by Bernardino Drobetti, French consul in Egypt and one of the first great European collectors of Egyptian antiquities. It was sent to Italy along with other documents and remained rolled up for decades, ignored or even censored due to its content, which was considered inappropriate for the academic morality of the time. It was not until well into the 20th century that it was allowed to be studied more freely, and since then the questions have only multiplied. Unlike most Egyptian texts, this papyrus bears no resemblance to sacred hymns, administrative records, or magic formulas. Nor does it seem to have a clear funerary or educational function. It is in many ways a unique object, a cultural anomaly. Some scholars have interpreted it as an erotic satire aimed at the upper classes, possibly a mockery of scribes, priests, or even certain religious practices involving sacred female figures. Others believe it is simply ancient pornography, created for entertainment with a deliberately crude and provocative tone. But would it make sense to produce such an elaborate object for that purpose alone? There are elements in the papyrus that do not fit with that simple explanation. For example, the quality of the lines, the artistic mastery of the artist, and the attention to detail. Everything suggests that the author was not an amateur, but a professional, perhaps even official scribe with training tempered by years of practice. Why would someone like that devote their time to such a subversive document? Another more symbolic theory holds that the papyrus is a form of sexual magic or a coded fertility ritual intended not for entertainment, but to influence the spiritual world through the graphic representation of desire. In the Egyptian world, where images had power, this is not a far-fetched idea. But if that were the case, why are there no other similar examples? And that is perhaps the most disturbing thing about the Turin erotic papyrus: its isolation. We know of no other similar documents. There are no collections of Egyptian erotic art that accompany or explain it. It is as if this papyrus had emerged and disappeared completely outside the canon, as if it were an exception carefully hidden by those who knew that it challenged more than just aesthetics. Today, some fragments of the papyrus have deteriorated, and it remains only partially legible. The accompanying phrases have not been fully deciphered, and the cultural context that could explain it accurately are no longer within our reach. The Egypt that produced it no longer exists, and modern eyes, however hard they try to understand it, do so from an almost unfathomable cultural distance. We are faced with a gesture of irreverence in a deeply ritualized world, a visual satire that we have not understood, or the key to a hidden tradition repressed by centuries of selective interpretation. The Turin erotic papyrus does not shout, it does not impose itself, but once you have seen it, you cannot forget it. Like a whisper from the depths of antiquity, it remains there, disconcerting, uncomfortable, waiting to be truly read. And while the Turin papyrus whispered a provocative language to us from the shadows of ancient Egypt, we now cross oceans and continents to reach the southern coast of India. There, where the sea breaks against the rocks with a constant and unchanging rhythm, lies another of the great enigmas of the ancient world. A mystery carved in stone and submerged in the waves. A place where history mixes with legend, and where the ocean may still hold the remains of a lost city. we delve into the mystery of the 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram. About 60 kilometers south of Chennai, in the state of Tamil Nadu, lies the coastal town of Mahabalipuram, also known as Mamallapuram. Today it is famous for its granite temples, monumental sculptures, and mystical atmosphere. But beneath this visible surface lies a much older and more difficult history to decipher. Local tradition has it that where the shore temple now stands, an impressive structure dedicated to the god Shiva, there were once 6 more temples, 7 in total, lined up, facing the ocean like a sacred stone necklace. 7 pagodas that, according to legend, were swallowed by the sea after an ancient cataclysm. Myth, distorted memory of a real event, or vestige of coastal civilization that disappeared without a trace. The truth is that for centuries, the story of the 7 pagodas was considered a local legend with no archaeological basis. European chroniclers of the 10th century mentioned these stories with some skepticism. Even some English colonial texts referred to the tale of the lost temples as a superstition among fishermen. But in December 2004, everything changed. After the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami, the sea receded momentarily for hundreds of meters, exposing submerged structures off the coast of Mahabalipuram. Eyewitnesses claimed to have seen stone walls, columns, and sculptures on the seabed, visible only for a few minutes. Days later, archaeologists and historians arrived at the site and began a new phase of underwater exploration. What they found surprised everyone. A short distance from the coast, under meters of water and sediment, they found the remains of aligned buildings, carvings reminiscent of the style of the 7th century, and precisely arranged stone blocks. They could belong to the lost temples. This was the first tangible proof that the 7 pagodas were not just a myth. Preliminary studies suggest that these structures could indeed have been part of a larger religious complex, now submerged by the sea due to the progressive advance of the coastline or a sudden event such as an earthquake or a major storm centuries ago. Oral traditions that had long been ignored suddenly took on unexpected significance. And yet, many questions remain unanswered. Why were temples built so close to the sea, exposed to its destructive force? Was it part of a symbolic design, an act of devotion to the forces of the ocean so revered in Hindu cosmology? And why 7? The number appears repeatedly in various ancient cultures as a symbol of wholeness, of cosmic balance. 7 heavens, 7 sages, 7 temples. We are faced with an arrangement steeped in spiritual meaning that went beyond the architectural. Another line of research suggests that Mahabalipuram was not only a religious center, but also an astronomical hub. Some experts have noted that the orientation of the temples visible on land is related to celestial events. It could be a submerged astronomical ritual complex, a kind of Stonehenge of South Asia. Added to this is an even more enigmatic aspect. Certain carvings still visible on the coast depict sea creatures, boats, and human figures interacting symbolically with the water, warnings, memories of a disaster carved in stone, or simple religious representations. Today, archaeologists continue to work with sonar and underwater scanning technology to map the seabed. Off Mahabalipuram, each new fragment found is another piece in a 1,000-year-old puzzle, but access remains difficult, and the tides of the Bay of Bengal do not always allow for safe working conditions. And so the question remains, were there ever really 7 temples? Or are the remains discovered part of other, as yet unidentified structures belonging to a larger settlement? Could there be more temples still hidden beneath layers of sediment waiting to be rediscovered? The 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram remind us that sometimes the line between myth and reality is thinner than we imagine, that beneath the waves, between the sand and the coral, there may be entire chapters of our history that we have not yet read. And perhaps, just perhaps, the ocean has not yet had its final say. And while the sea off Mahabalipuram briefly revealed the ruins of submerged temples, our journey now takes us away from the heat and the sound of the waves and into the cold silence of Northern Europe. Hey, landscape of endless tundra, pale skies, and auroras that cross the firmament like whispers from another world. There, among the frozen forests and mountains of Scandinavia, an ancient people has maintained an intimate relationship with the spirits, the elements, and the invisible. We are heading towards the world of the Sami and the enigma of their sacred drums. Sami drums, or gwabdis, are more than just musical instruments. They are ritual objects, symbolic gateways to other realities, and silent witnesses to a knowledge that was almost destroyed. Traditionally made from birchwood frames covered with reindeer skin and decorated with ochre symbols, these drums were not played for entertainment. They were beaten slowly, like a pulse, while the Noidi, the Sami shaman, entered a trance and navigated between worlds. But what has most puzzled historians and anthropologists is not the shamanic use of the drum common to many indigenous cultures, but the symbols that cover it. Maps of dots, lines, human figures. Animals, suns, moons, snakes. A visual language as cryptic as it is powerful. Was it a writing system, a coded cosmology, a calendar, or perhaps all of these things at once? Many of the known drums were confiscated during the 10th and 17th centuries, when Christian missionaries and the Swedish and Norwegian authorities launched a campaign to eradicate the traditional religious practices of the Sami people. The drums were seen as instruments of that they were burned, hidden, or sent to museums far from their homeland. And yet some survived. Today, a few dozen authentic drums are preserved in collections in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, and Germany. Each one is different. No two drums have exactly the same symbols, but they all share a visual structure that suggests intentionality, order, and, above all, knowledge. On many drums, the symbols are arranged in horizontal bands or concentric circles. The upper part usually represents the celestial world, the sun, the moon, and elevated spiritual entities. The middle section seems to speak of the earthly world, people, reindeer, houses, elements of the landscape, and the lower part represents the underground, the invisible, what dwells beneath the surface. We are thus faced with a three-dimensional representation of the Sami universe, a ritual cosmography that allows the shaman to orient himself on his spiritual journeys. Some researchers have attempted to translate these symbols by assigning them fixed meanings. This sign represents a thunder god. That other one indicates a reindeer migration route. This circle is the spirit of the forest. But the Sami descendants themselves warn that meanings can vary from one community to another, from one drum to another. What is important is not so much the symbol, but the intention with which it is used. And that is where the real mystery begins. Because in recent years, voices have emerged claiming that these drums could hide more than just spiritual symbolism. Some scholars have suggested that certain patterns could be related to astronomical cycles or navigation systems adapted to the tundra and migrations. They could have been multifunctional tools, a type of encyclopedic knowledge transmitted visually. Others have gone so far as to compare the symbols to binary codes or structures similar to those of modern computer language. A theory without conclusive evidence, but one that raises a provocative question. What if the drums contained complex information that we have not yet been able to decipher? The truth is that for centuries, Sami knowledge has been marginalized, ridiculed, or reinterpreted from outside paradigms. And although there has been a cultural renaissance among the indigenous peoples of the North in recent decades, much of the shamanic legacy remains shrouded in silence. One of the most emblematic cases is that of the Rikhola drum, confiscated in the 11th century and now preserved in a European museum. Its symbols have been analyzed time and again without reaching a unified interpretation. Some of its figures seem to show constellations, others describe ritual routes, but no one has managed to translate it completely. Has the key been lost, or have we simply not learned to look at it from the right place? The Low Sami never developed a formal writing system as we understand it today. Their knowledge was transmitted orally, in songs, rituals, and images drawn with natural pigments. The drum was not a book. It was a bridge, a map for traveling between worlds and perhaps also between times. Today, the sacred drums remain the subject of debate, reclamation, and mystery. Some have been returned to their communities of origin. Others remain in display cases, protected by glass, but misunderstood. Were these circles, these figures, these marks that resist oblivion really telling us? And how many more drums were destroyed, taking with them fragments of a worldview that we are only just beginning to reconstruct? The cold of the North not only preserves, it also hides. And among its white landscapes, there may still be answers that no one has been able to hear. And while the Sami drums keep the echoes of ancestral knowledge, yet to be deciphered, on their skin, we now head to a place where mystery is not carved into symbols, but into the imposing mass of stone itself, a place that has defied all architectural logic since ancient times. There, in the heart of modern Lebanon, under the scorching sun of the Bekaa Valley, stand the remains of one of the most amazing megalithic complexes of the ancient world. We delve into the enigma of the origin of the Baalbek trilithon. Baalbek was known in Roman times as Heliopolis, the city of the sun. On its foundations was built one of the largest temples dedicated to Jupiter, with Corinthian columns that still rise defiantly toward the sky. But what has really captured the attention of archaeologists, engineers, and thinkers around the world are not the columns, but the foundations on which they rest. On the western retaining wall of the temple are 3 stones of colossal proportions arranged with extraordinary precision. They are known as the Baalbek trilithons. Each of these blocks is approximately 19 m long, 4 m high, and weighs over 800 tons. There is no other set of stones carved, transported, and placed by humans in ancient times that is even remotely similar. Feet, how were these stones extracted from the quarry? How were they moved uphill to the temple? And how were they aligned with almost millimeter precision at a time when the technology to move such a mass did not even exist? Just a few hundred meters southwest of the temple is the quarry from which these blocks were supposedly extracted. One remains there, unfinished, partially separated from the bedrock. It is known as the Pregnant Woman's Block and weighs over 1,000 tons. Another, even larger block, discovered in 2014 under layers of earth, weighs over 100 tons. The blocks are there, they are real, they can be measured, touched, studied, but their existence raises more questions than answers. Conventional explanations suggest that the Romans, masters of engineering, were able to move these stones using wooden rollers, levers, pulleys, and an immense workforce. But even among the most ardent proponents of this theory, there is an implicit acknowledgement. We have no clear evidence of how they did it. There are no written records. There are no illustrations, no comparable Roman precedents. So, were it really the Romans, or did they inherit this structure from an earlier civilization? Some archaeologists propose that the base of the temple, including the trilithons, could have been the work of an older culture, perhaps Canaanite or Phoenician, and that the Romans simply built on top of it. The construction techniques would have been different, more rudimentary, and the mystery of how the stones were moved would remain unsolved, but at least it would explain the overlapping architectural styles. However, other researchers have gone further, suggesting more speculative hypotheses, ranging from forgotten hydraulic technologies to harmonic vibration systems, to the possibility that the ancients had knowledge of magnetic levitation or physical principles that we have since lost. It has even been suggested that the knowledge required to move these blocks could have come from an external, foreign source, but the mystery does not need extravagant theories to remain powerful. The most puzzling thing is that the trilithons do not seem to have had a strictly necessary structural function. Their position in the retaining wall was not essential to the stability of the temple. So why insist on using such colossal blocks? Was it an act of devotion, a way of paying homage to the gods through mastery over the impossible? Or was it a way of leaving an eternal legacy, a mark in stone that would defy time and human understanding? As the sun sets over the ruins of Baalbek and shadows lengthen over the megalithic blocks, the scene takes on an almost sacred air. One cannot help but feel that there is something here that we have not fully understood. We are faced with a demonstration of human capacity pushed to the limit or the vestige of lost knowledge, buried not only under centuries of history, but under centuries of oblivion. The Balbuck trilithons remain there, immovable, unchallengeable, their very presence continuing to pose a silent question to those who dare to contemplate them. How and why? And while the colossal trilithons of Balbuck confront us with the mystery of the impossible in stone, we now turn to the other side of the world. There, where the Andes entangle with the jungle and the clouds, clinging to the hillsides as if guarding an ancient secret. There, where the air is thinner, the ground sculpted by fog, and the mountains hide more than they reveal, there once lived a people who disappeared without a sound, but left behind a legacy that still baffles history. We enter the lost world of the Chachapala, the enigmatic people of the clouds. Located in the northeastern region of present-day Peru, the land of the Chachapala is a wild landscape covered by rainforests and vertiginous precipices. The rains are constant, the mountains unstable. And yet, among these rugged cliffs and eternal mists, this civilization built fortresses, roads, mausoleums, and entire cities. All of it in stone, and all of it literally suspended on the edge between heaven and earth. The Incas called them Chachapicana, which could be translated as people of the clouds. Although Inca accounts are scarce, they describe them as brave warriors, difficult to conquer and different in appearance from other Andean peoples. Where did they come from, and how did they manage to survive in such a hostile environment? The main vestige of their passage is Quilap, an impressive citadel built more than 3,000 m above sea level. Enclosed by cyclopean walls up to 20 m high, the city looks more like a fortress than a normal settlement. But inside, far from military structures, we find hundreds of circular dwellings, some decorated with diamond-shaped and zigzag friezes. A unique aesthetic, an architectural language that is not repeated in other pre-Columbian cultures. Access to Quilap is arduous. There are no easy roads. The area is covered by dense vegetation and remained virtually forgotten for centuries. It was rediscovered by European explorers in the 19th century and has since been the subject of numerous archaeological campaigns, although many questions remain unanswered. For example, why was an entire city built in such a remote and difficult-to-reach place? Was it a ceremonial capital, a center of resistance, a refuge from invaders? Or perhaps a sacred site chosen for its proximity to the sky and the forces that dwell there? But that is only part of the enigma. Throughout the region, archaeologists have found mausoleums hanging from cliffs, human-shaped carved sarcophagi, and burials in caves that are almost impossible to access. The famous sarcophagi of Coragia, for example, stand like lonely sentinels on vertical crags. They are up to 25 meters high. They are made of clay, wood, and stone. Inside them were carefully arranged mummies, many of them wrapped in ritual cloths. Who were these dead people who deserved such tombs? Priests, nobles, warriors? And how were these figures transported and placed in such inaccessible places? Their belief system has not been fully deciphered either. Unlike the Incas, the Chachapolia left no written records or quipus. What we know about them comes from external accounts or material remains. And those remains, walls, pottery, bones, offerings, speak of a sophisticated but also deeply spiritual people linked to the mountains, the fog, and the passage between worlds. Another detail that has fueled the mystery is the physical appearance attributed to the Chachapala. Spanish chroniclers of the 10th century mentioned that many of them had fair skin and reddish or blonde hair, something uncommon among Andean populations. Some have suggested possible foreign influences, contact with peoples of the Amazon rainforest, or even older migrations from distant regions. There may have been cultural mixing prior to the arrival of the Europeans, or these may simply be exaggerations by chroniclers. What is certain is that when the Incas arrived in the 15th century, the Chachapoya offered fierce resistance, but were eventually conquered and assimilated. Not long after, with the arrival of the Spanish, many of their traditions disappeared forever. What remains today are moss-covered ruins, tombs opened by time, and a lingering feeling that something important is slipping away from us. It is as if the Chachapala had learned to inhabit not only the physical world, but also that other, more subtle world where history does not always leave traces. What knowledge did we lose with them? What do they know about the mountains, the climate, the soul? And how many of their cities remain hidden in the clouds, waiting to be discovered? In the far reaches of the Peruvian Andes, where fog erases the horizon and silence weighs heavier than the earth, the mystery of a people who knew how to coexist with the unreachable still lives on. And while the echoes of the Chachapalas dissolve in the mist of the Andes, our journey now takes us to the other side of the world, to an ancient land shaped by empires and philosophies, where the art of war was intertwined with technical refinement. In the heart of China, among pots, jade seals, and ancient rituals, an object appeared that not only defies the corrosion of time, but also our understanding of history. It is the mystery of Gon's broken sword. The discovery took place in 1965 during routine excavations in a tomb near Jubai province. Upon opening one of the sarcophagi, archaeologists found a lacquered wooden case which, when carefully removed, revealed a bronze sword over 2,000 years old, perfectly preserved, shiny, with no trace of rust. It was thin and elegant, with a blade so sharp that it could still cut paper effortlessly. Its gold and turquoise decorations adorned the pommel. On the base of the blade, an inscription in ancient Chinese characters revealed its identity. Sword of the King of Yu, Gaian. Gai was a legendary monarch who ruled the kingdom of Yu during the spring and autumn period around the 5th century BC. He was a king known for his resilience, military cunning, and ability to reverse his fate in the face of powerful enemies. The sword seemed to embody that same tenacity and for decades was admired as an unparalleled archaeological gem. But in the 1990s, something changed. During an exhibition, the sword was accidentally damaged. It broke. A fracture line cut through the blade, exposing its core, and what was found inside was even more puzzling than its perfect exterior. Metallurgical analysis revealed a highly unusual bronze alloy. The composition included tin, lead, and small amounts of iron and sulfur. But what caught the attention was the pattern of the internal structure, a network of layers so precise that it resembled modern techniques of heat treatment and oxidation resistance. How was it possible that a civilization from the 5th century BC could have mastered such knowledge of metallurgy? Experts tried to reproduce the technique without success. The imitations could not withstand the humid conditions. They corroded and fractured. But Gaian's sword, despite being partially broken, continued to defy the passage of time. This raised deeper questions. Was the sword an exceptional product of a forgotten technological elite? Did a metallurgical tradition exist in the kingdom of Yu that was lost in wars and conquests? Or are we looking at a unique, perhaps ceremonial relic, created by extraordinary hands and then forgotten? Some researchers suggest that the weapon's preservation may have been due to accidental factors, the sealed conditions of the tomb, the dry climate, or the protection of a lacquered sheath. And yet, none of these explanations fully solve the mystery of its composition. Not only is it well preserved, it is designed to resist deterioration. In ancient engravings, the figure of Gaian often appears meditating in front of his sword, using it not only as a weapon, but as a symbol of inner resistance. It is said that after being defeated and humiliated by the rival kingdom of Yu, he spent years pretending to fulfill his mission while secretly planning his revenge. He lived austerely, slept on the floor, and tasted bitter medicines every day to remember the taste of defeat. And when the time came, he regained his kingdom and destroyed his enemy. And if the sword was not just a physical object, but also a message, a tangible reminder of the will that survives adversity. Over time, more speculative theories have proposed even more puzzling ideas. such as that the blade was tempered using a now-lost method based on resonant principles, that its metallic composition was calculated to have electromagnetic properties, and even that it was a ceremonial weapon with ritual capabilities that are still unknown. But beyond the theories, the mystery remains. Today, the Gujin sword is kept in the Provincial Museum of UBI, where it still arouses the admiration of those who observe it. It shines even under artificial light, silent, as if waiting for something. What other metallic secrets have disappeared over time? How much ancient knowledge was erased before it could be understood? And if this sword has survived more than 2 millennia in this state, it is possible that there are more artifacts still hidden, waiting to be found in the mist of the Chinese mountains and in the silent echo of a lost empire. The broken sword of a king reminds us that even that which is broken can still hold power. And while Guan's sword speaks to us from the metallic silence of a civilization that mastered the invisible, we turn once again to South Asia, where stone, more than a material, becomes a story, where surfaces are not made to be smooth, but to tell stories, and where mystery is not hidden underground, but in plain sight, carved with a precision that is still difficult to comprehend today. We enter the temple of Joysalsgwara in Jalavidu, in southern India, a place where every wall is an enigma, every column a narrative, and every figure an unanswered question. Built in the 11th century during the reign of the Hoysala dynasty, the temple was dedicated to Shiva, one of the most powerful deities in the Hindu pantheon. From the outside, its low, broad silhouette seems more modest than the large vertical temples of the north. But as you get closer, you are struck by its grandeur. Along the 200-meter-long facade is an almost uninterrupted sequence of bas-reliefs. Human figures, animals, mythological scenes, battles, dances, instruments, deities, and monsters are carved with a meticulousness that seems impossible. Each figure has exact proportions, millimeter-precise details, fingernails, wrinkles, braids, and facial expressions. Some pieces are only a few inches long, yet they are as finely crafted as life-size sculptures. The layers of depth in the stone create visual effects that seem almost animated as one moves along the wall. And then the inevitable question arises. How was this achieved with hand tools more than 800 years ago? Historians agree that the Joysala craftsmen mastered advanced stone carving techniques, especially on a hard and brittle material, such as chlorite. Exquistosa. But even with that knowledge, what we see at Hoyselswara goes beyond skill. It borders on perfection. Some scenes contain more than 100 separate figures, with no visible errors, no repetitions, no crooked lines. And all of this was carved directly onto the surface of the temple with no evidence of correction or replacement. These were not molds or assemblages. Each section was carved in situ, which would be difficult even with modern tools. They followed an unknown system of measurement. There are hidden plans, geometric codes, or a transfer technique that has been lost. In addition to the technical enigma, there is the narrative enigma. The bas-reliefs do not simply repeat the traditional stories of the Mahabharata or of the Ramayana, the two great epic poems of Hinduism. They also include scenes that seem out of the ordinary, animals that do not exist, warriors in costumes that do not fit the fashion of the time, representations that some have interpreted as astronomical or even technological. A creature with a helmet, a being mounted on a structure that appears mechanical, symbolic representations, or records of something more literal. Official archaeology maintains that everything must be read within the mythological context of Hindu art, where iconography is loaded with abstract symbols and multiple levels of interpretation. But some independent scholars are not so sure. What if these bas-reliefs were not just art, but a code, a kind of encrypted visual archive containing spiritual, astronomical, or even historical knowledge that has not been passed down through other channels? Another puzzling element is the absence of errors in the narrative sequence. There are no unnecessary duplicate figures. There are no signs of improvisation or correction. It is as if the sculptors had worked from a master plan, a global vision of the temple and its meaning from the first stroke of the chisel. And yet, no manuals, texts, or art treatises from that period have been preserved to explain how. This collective work was organized. Everything was transmitted orally. Everything disappeared over time. Added to this is the fact that the temple was looted and partially destroyed during the Muslim invasions in the following centuries. Part of its roof collapsed. Some sculptures were decapitated, and yet most of its story remains intact. Today, visitors walk along these walls without knowing that they are crossing a threshold into the unknown, not only because of the technical mastery, but because of the feeling that there is something more, something that cannot be translated, that cannot be taught, only contemplated. Who were the artisans who carved it? And how deep was their understanding of the physical and symbolic world? How many of those meanings remain dormant in the stone? The Temple of Joyzel's does not demand answers. It simply invites us to look closely, to read what is not written, and to listen to what the stone seems to have been saying for centuries. And while the stones of Unsolved seem to whisper ancient stories in a visual language yet to be deciphered, we now move on to another type of inscription, one that is not designed to be beautiful, but to leave a record, not carved on the walls of a sacred temple, but fragmented, broken, scattered, as if time itself had tried to silence its message. We head north to Israel, to the ruins of Tel Dan, where a broken slab forever changed the way we understand biblical history. It is the mystery of the Tel Dan stele. Tel Dan. The discovery occurred in 1993 during archaeological excavations led by Abraham Viren. Under layers of earth and rubble between the walls of the ancient Canaanite city of Dan, archaeologists discovered 3 fragments of black basalt stone. In appearance, nothing out of the ordinary. But when they were cleaned, words carved firmly in ancient Aramaic emerged. And among those words was a mention that shook both the academic and religious worlds. House of David. For centuries, the figure of King David, poet, warrior, monarch, had inhabited the ambiguous realm between history and myth. Biblical sources spoke of him at length, but there was no direct archaeological evidence to confirm his existence as a historical figure. For many scholars, David was more of a literary construct than a real individual. And yet there it was, an inscription dating from approximately the 9th century BC, engraved by an Aramean king, probably Azael of Damascus, celebrating a victory over Israel and Judah and mentioning that he had defeated a king of the house of David. 3 words, but enough to reopen a millennial debate. What exactly does House of David mean? Is it a reference to a dynasty, to a royal lineage founded by a historical figure? Or can it be interpreted as a symbolic title adopted centuries after the king's supposed lifetime? The stele is incomplete. The most important fragment is broken in several critical places. The sentences are truncated, the letters worn away. Some researchers have attempted to reconstruct the complete text from other Aramaic and Hebrew documents of the period. Others, more skeptical, have suggested that the term David could have been added or misinterpreted, or that it refers to another figure or place with a similar name. But no theory has managed to completely dispel the force of the evidence. A real, non-Hebrew, non-biblical inscription mentioning a dynastic house linked to David in a specific geopolitical context. Furthermore, the Tel Dan stele is not an isolated find. Its discovery has been compared to another inscription, the Mesha stele in Moab, which also mentions conflicts with Israel and Judah in similar terms. We are seeing fragments of a broader regional history, woven between kingdoms that shared borders, enemies, and conflicting versions of the same events. The style of the inscription also poses its own enigmas. The Aramaic language it uses has a literary structure that suggests a carefully constructed political narrative. It is not just a chronicle of war, it is a message of power, an assertion of legitimacy. The victorious king not only celebrates his triumph, he also attempts to rewrite the memory of his enemies. What if what we have found is not so much a fact as a version? What if each stele, each inscription, is part of a broader battle to control the narrative of history? The location of the find in Tel Dan is also significant. This ancient city in the northern region of Israel was a strategic point in biblical times. It was the border between the kingdom of Israel and its Aramean neighbors. It was a place of worship, of passage, of conflict. That this inscription appeared there and not in Jerusalem or an Israelite capital adds even more layers of complexity. It was a deliberate provocation, a message carved in stone and left in enemy territory as an act of symbolic domination. Today, the fragments of the Tel Dan stele are kept in the Israel Museum, protected by glass, but exposed to the interpretation of those who observe them. Each letter is analyzed, enlarged, photographed in high resolution, and yet its deeper meaning continues to elude us. Because what this broken slab raises is not just a question about a name, it is a question about the very nature of history. To what extent can we trust accounts written centuries after the events? And how much has been lost, altered, or silenced in that abyss between the event and the inscription? Perhaps there are more fragments, still hidden beneath the earth. Perhaps the story of David, of Israel, of the kingdoms of the ancient Levant is waiting to be told from a perspective we do not yet know. Because in archaeology, as in life, what is missing is as important as what is found. And sometimes 3 words are enough to cast doubt on 1,000 years of certainty. And after contemplating the fragmented words of the Tel Dan stele, which emerge as whispers from the ruins of a millennial conflict, we now turn away. The desert, the stone, and the war to approach the murmur of the Indian Ocean, where the tides have brought and taken away ships, civilizations, and secrets. And in a corner of the eastern African coast, in an ancient port city now shrouded in vegetation, lies an enigma that arrived in the form of small pieces of metal. We delve into the mystery of the unknown coins of Kilwa. Kilwa Kisiwani, located off the coast of what is now Tanzania, was once a powerful city. Between the 10th and 15th centuries, this port controlled much of the trade in the southwestern Indian Ocean. Gold, ivory, ceramics, spices, and slaves passed through its docks. Its architecture, made of carved coral and elegant Islamic arches, rivaled the richest cities in the Arab world, but it was the discovery of small coins that drew historians to an even older and more puzzling history. During the 19th century, archaeologists and explorers found several bronze coins in the vicinity of Kilwa. These small, rounded coins with Arabic inscriptions did not correspond to the most common coinage of the medieval Islamic world. They were different and even stranger. Some of them could not be dated accurately. Most of the preserved Kilwani coins date from the reign of various sultans of the city between the 10th and 11th centuries. Their names are written in Kufic Arabic and in some cases include references to honorary titles and precise dates from the Islamic calendar. But other coins, similar in shape and weight, bear no inscription, only symbols. And others, found more than 5,000 kilometers away, have raised even deeper questions. In 1944, on the Wessel Islands off the north coast of Australia, an Australian soldier named Maury Eisenberg found several coins while walking on the beach. He did not think much of them, but years later, he handed them over to a local museum. When they were analyzed, experts discovered something astonishing. 5 of the coins were Omani from the 10th century, but 2 of them were from Kilwa. How did these coins from East Africa end up on a remote island in northern Australia centuries before the European colonization of Oceania? The conventional explanation suggests that they could have been transported by Arab sailors or Swahili merchants, who eventually extended their route southward. But there is no solid historical evidence documenting direct contact between Kilwa and Australia before the 19th century. They were brought by unknown sailors, by explorers whose journey was lost in the currents of time. Some scholars have proposed the hypothesis of a wider trade network than previously thought, connecting East Africa with Southeast Asia and beyond. Others have suggested that the coins may have been transported on shipwrecks, carried by ocean currents, or even intentionally buried by sailors who never returned to retrieve them. And yet, the most disturbing thing is not their presence in Australia, but their scarcity. There are no large coin hoards from Kilwa, only small scattered finds. There is no consensus on the number of coins minted or the processes used to make them. Some appear to have been made with rudimentary molds. Others are more refined, but their design does not match those of mints known in other regions of the Islamic world. Did Kilwa have its own autonomous numismatic tradition, unrelated to the main trade routes? Or were these coins part of a symbolic, ritual, or even secret economy? It is also unclear what role they played in the city's trade. Were they everyday currency, honorary medals, ritual seals, and why did they disappear so quickly, leaving so little documentary evidence? The lack of written text from the period complicates the task. Much of what is known about Kilwa comes from external sources, such as the accounts of the Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta, who visited the city in the 14th century and described it as a refined, prosperous, and pious city. But even he does not mention the use of a specific currency. Today, Kilwa coins are preserved in museums in Tanzania, Oman, the United Kingdom, and Australia. There are few, too few for a city that was the capital of a sultanate, a commercial hub of the Indian Ocean, and a religious center for centuries. What happened to the rest? Were they melted down, destroyed, forgotten? Or are they still underground, waiting to be rediscovered? In the turquoise waters of Kilwak, Kishawani, among the submerged remains of palaces, mosques, and piers, some of those ownerless coins may still lie dormant. Small bronze circles that, despite their size, contain questions that span half the world. What if these coins are not just remnants of a commercial past, but traces of a map we have not yet been able to read? After following the trail of some African coins that mysteriously appeared on a remote Pacific island, we now return to more familiar lands, but no less enigmatic. We find ourselves in Greece, not in its most famous temples or ruins frequented by modern tourists, but on an island covered in mountains, mist, and ancient winds, Euboea. And there, among the cliffs and forests, stand structures that have baffled historians, architects, and archaeologists for generations. These are the enigmatic Dracospida, the dragon houses. At first glance, they look like stacked blocks of stone, ancient shepherd shelters, or structures forgotten by time. But as you get closer, you sense that there is something else, something deliberate, something that does not quite fit into any conventional architectural category. Built with gigantic blocks of limestone without mortar or cement, the dragon houses are scattered across the highest points of the mountains in southern Euboea. The most famous, the Dracospido on Mount Oki, stands at an altitude of over 100 m, overlooking the Aegean Sea and the indecipherable horizon that separates the land from myth. The slabs that form its roof weigh several tons, but they are perfectly aligned and fitted together, as if someone had known exactly how to distribute the weight so that it could withstand centuries of winds, earthquakes, and neglect. Who built them and why? There are no inscriptions, no tombs, no ritual objects, only walls, roofs, silence, and a lingering sense of bewilderment. The dating of these structures remains a matter of debate. Some experts place them in a Hellenistic period around the 2nd century BC, based on comparison with other construction techniques. But other researchers believe they could be much older, perhaps even predating the Mycenaean civilization due to their megalithic style, which is more reminiscent of Cycladic constructions than classical Greek architecture. And then the inevitable question arises: why are they called dragon houses? Local oral tradition speaks of drakens, gigantic creatures, not necessarily winged reptiles, but powerful beings, guardians of the mountain and of ancient knowledge. In legends, these dragons were not beasts, but entities that controlled nature and guarded treasures or knowledge. Were these structures really associated with lost cults, with legendary figures that time transformed into myth? Some anthropologists suggest that the name may have originated in the Middle Ages as part of a popular reinterpretation of the monumental landscape. But the truth is that even for the ancient Greeks, these constructions were already an enigma. There are no clear references to them in classical texts. It is as if even then they were seen as part of a distant, even forgotten past. One theory proposes that they were temples for the worship of primitive gods prior to the Olympian pantheon. Another more pragmatic theory suggests that they were high mountain shelters for isolated communities used for storage or surveillance. And yet, what is puzzling is the quality and ambition of their construction. Why build with such huge stones and such inaccessible places with no apparent signs of usefulness? Engineers who have studied the dragon houses highlight the sophistication of their assembly. The slabs are laid without visible joints, without marks from modern tools, and have withstood centuries of exposure to the elements without collapsing. This is not simple rustic architecture. It is refined technique. It is intention. They could be related to other megalithic traditions in the Mediterranean. Could they have been part of a cultural network that we have not yet managed to reconstruct? Some researchers have even suggested links with astronomical phenomena. The orientation of certain Dracospidas seems to coincide with solar and lunar alignments. Were they primitive observatories, celestial sanctuaries, or simply coincidences interpreted from our contemporary perspective? The truth is that to date, not a single inscription, symbol, or ceremonial object has been found to confirm their religious or astronomical use. And perhaps that is the most disturbing thing, the total absence of context, as if these houses have been built for a purpose that did not need to be explained, as if their meaning lay in their form and not in their adornments. The dragon houses of Euboea are still there, alone, silent, resisting time on the tops of mountains that few visit, sometimes hidden by fog, sometimes illuminated by the low light of dawn, which outlines their profiles with an almost supernatural drama. Who were the real builders of these structures? And what were they trying to protect, guard, or point out from those heights? Perhaps the answer lies buried under centuries of earth. Or perhaps, as with true mysteries, the answer is not a word, but a feeling. And after contemplating the mysterious dragon houses of Euboea, towering over the mountains like fragments of forgotten architecture, we head east across the plains of the ancient Persian Empire to a region where history mixes with legend, and the ruins still whisper sacred names to the wind. There, in the city of Kangabar, in present-day Iran, stand the remains of a structure that has baffled generations of archaeologists, a temple that may have been dedicated to one of the oldest and most enigmatic deities in the region, Anaya, the goddess of water, fertility, and wisdom. We delve into the enigma of the Temple of Anaya of Kangabar. The first impression of the place is disconcerting. On a natural hill overlooking the valley, large limestone platforms extend and are delimited by colossal walls. The remains of giant columns, some still standing, are precisely aligned. There is no roof, no obvious decoration, no inscription that allows us to know with certainty the exact date of its construction. Only stone mass monumentality. Historical sources are scarce, but a single clue has given shape to modern speculation. The Greek historian Isidore of Charax in the 1st century AD mentions a temple dedicated to Anitis, the Hellenized version of Anida, located in the city of Concabar, which many identify with present-day Kangabar. Is this the structure mentioned by Isidore, or is it another even older building whose function has been lost? The chronology of the temple is one of its first mysteries. Some studies place its origin in the Hellenistic period after the conquest of Alexander the Great, due to certain architectural features similar to those of the Greek world. Others, however, argue that its base could be Achaemenid Persian, i.e., prior to the 6th century BC, or even part of a more remote religious tradition. With later additions, we could be looking at the remains of a temple that was enlarged, modified, and reused over centuries by different cultures. What has seemed clear is that the temple was erected for a sacred purpose. The platforms are oriented with a precision that does not seem arbitrary. The layout of the stairways, the monumentality of its columns, and its dominant location over the landscape suggest a function beyond the civil. Everything points to the veneration of a higher power, and in this case, that power may have been water. Anaya, in ancient Iranian religion, was much more than a river or rain deity. She was a cosmic entity, a purifying presence, protector of royalty, and symbol of fertility and wisdom. Her cult extended from Armenia to India, and her temples were places of offering, but also of contemplation. And yet, no statue of her has been found in Kangabar, nor a clear inscription, nor a ceremonial object that definitively confirms that this place was consecrated to her. This has given rise to more speculative interpretations. Some researchers suggest that the temple was originally built for another deity or even as a celestial observatory. Others believe that its monumental design had a more abstract ritual purpose, representing the elevation towards the divine, the transition between Earth and the cosmos through stone and space. Some claim to have identified the remains of ancient channels that carried water to the platform, which would reinforce the hypothesis of a water temple. But hydrogeological studies are inconclusive. The terrain has changed, and the traces of water, like the cult of Anaya itself, seem to have evaporated. The Hellenistic influence on the architectural remains has also raised new questions. Was it the Greeks who introduced the classical style to this Persian sanctuary? Or was it Persian architecture that inspired forms that we would later see in the Hellenic world? Who imitated whom? This dialogue between cultures, visible in every fallen column and stone base, seems to speak of a time when the boundaries between religions, languages, and kingdoms were more porous than we imagine. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the temple, not its original function, but its capacity to contain centuries of reinterpretation. Today, the ruins of Kangabar remain an open enigma, despite 20th century excavations that attempted to restore and classify its parts. The site retains its ambiguity. Too large to be ignored, too elusive to be fully understood. This is the trace of a forgotten cult to an ancient goddess who united the feminine, the cosmic, and the fluid in a single sacred image. Or is it a ceremonial structure whose symbols have escaped us, distorted by time, silence, and wars? As you gaze at the ruins at sunset, when the light softens the edges of the stone and the breeze blows through the broken columns as if searching for answers, one cannot help but wonder what remains of Anida, only her name in ancient texts, or also a power that can still be felt, even if it cannot be explained. And after touring the silent ruins of the Temple of Anaya, where the marble still echoes with the memory of a lost divinity, we now travel to the desert, where time not only buries, but also preserves. There, in the vast sands of Egypt, where tombs line up like closed pages of an ancient book, an object was found that was so delicate that it seemed impossible that it could have survived more than 5,000 years. An object that does not belong to kings or gods or battles, but to everyday life, to humanity. Today we explore the enigma of the Tarkan dress. About 50 kilometers south of Cairo lies the Tarkan necropolis. Excavated in the early 20th century by Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, the area contained hundreds of tombs dating from the late pre-dynastic period to the early Old Kingdom, around 3100 BC. Among amulets, pottery shards, tools, and funerary wrappings, a bundle wrapped in linen appeared. At first glance, it looked like a pile of worthless rags. Decades passed without anyone noticing it. It was not until 1977 that the contents were examined by the Victoria Anal Trace Museum, revealing the find. A perfectly tailored garment with narrow sleeves, a gathered waist, and very fine seams, a tunic or a dress. Light, simple, surprisingly modern. The Tarkan dress is still the oldest complete woven garment in existence, dated by radiocarbon analysis to around 3482 to 3102 BC. Its age coincides with Egypt's first steps toward civilization, yet its construction does not seem to belong to a primitive world. The stitching is precise. The intentional design and cut reflect an advanced understanding of a human body. How is it possible for such a dress to exist in an earlier era, even before the pyramids? Made of linen, woven by hand, the dress features decorative pleats on the chest and carefully assembled sleeves. There are no luxurious embellishments, no gold thread, no precious stones, but there's style, there's form, there is aesthetic intention, and that is precisely the first mystery. Who wore it? Due to its size, it has been suggested that it may have belonged to a woman or a teenager from the upper class, but it was not found in a prominent royal tomb. Did it belong to a forgotten figure, or was it simply a highly valued garment, carefully placed in a tomb to preserve its essence? Another puzzling detail is its state of preservation. Despite the extreme fragility of linen, the garment has survived for more than 5,000 years. Was it protected by a particular microclimate inside the tomb, or was a special treatment used to prevent its decomposition? To date, no other fabric of this age has been found with such a high degree of integrity. Not in Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the civilizations of the Indus Valley. In many ways, it is an anomaly. Some fashion history experts have been perplexed by the refinement of the cut. The dress is not a simple piece of fabric wrapped around the body, as might be expected of a pre-dynastic garment. It is a piece made with skill and taste. A tradition of textile design already existed in those early centuries that we have not yet documented, and clothing may have played a more symbolic and sophisticated role in early cultures than we believe. Others wonder whether this dress was a prototype, a unique piece reserved for special occasions, or, on the contrary, a common garment, and that what is extraordinary is simply that it has survived. The earliest representations of clothing in Egypt come from bas-reliefs and later paintings from the Old Kingdom. In these, the figures appear in simple tunics, pleated skirts, and wraparound dresses. But there is no direct evidence of what people wore in previous centuries until Tarkhan appeared, and so a garment forgotten for decades at the back of a warehouse became an unexpected window into the deepest past, a literal and symbolic thread connecting the present with an era when written language was just beginning to emerge. Who sewed it? With what tools? And what did it mean to dress elegantly at that time? Was it a way to stand out, to protect oneself? To pay homage to the gods? Or perhaps, as so often happens in history, it was a mixture of all of these things, necessity, beauty, and symbolism, woven together in a single object. Today, Tarkhan's dress is carefully preserved in the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology in London, where it continues to fascinate those who see it. Not only because of its age, but because of what it hints at, because of what we still don't know. What other fragments of humanity, so subtle, so intimate, are still waiting beneath the sand? And if Tarkhan's dress spoke to us in whispers of linen about the refinement of a humanity that was already seeking beauty at the dawn of civilization, now we enter a very different mystery, one that does not dress, but reveals the deepest parts of the human body, one that does not speak of delicacy, but of scale, of a human dimension that seems to exceed known biological limits. We travel to the south of France at the end of the 19th century, when an archaeological discovery in Castelnau unleashed an enigma that remains unsolved to this day: the remains of the so-called Castelnau giant. It all began in 1890 during excavations led by anthropologist George Backer de la Puck in a prehistoric necropolis near Montpellier. Amidst fragments of pottery, tools, and conventional human bones, the team came across something that seemed out of place from the outset. 3 bone fragments, a femur, a humerus, and a partial tibia, all of enormous size, larger than any known human bone. Proportions extrapolated to the rest of the body suggested an approximate height of between 35 and 4 meters. Far from dismissing the find as an isolated anomaly, Backer de la Puck published his observations in Nature, a prestigious scientific journal, in 1890. The article detailed the exact measurements, compared the bones with normal specimens, and expressed his surprise at what he himself described as the remains of a race of giants. The scientific community, however, responded with caution. Some suggested that the bones could belong to an individual with extreme gigantism, a rare but documented medical condition. Others even doubted their authenticity, citing measurement errors, lack of clear archaeological context, or simple misinterpretation. And then the questions arose. Where are those bones today? Why haven't they been reanalyzed with modern technology? The truth is that today the original remains of the Castelnau giant are not on display in any museum. Their exact location is unknown, and their trail is lost in poorly documented archives from the late 19th century. A loss that, rather than closing the case, transforms it into legend. Since then, the discovery has been cited numerous times by alternative researchers, lost civilization theorists, and mystery enthusiasts. Some have linked the remains to biblical and mythological accounts of giants, the Nephilim, the Titans, and the Sogros. Others have gone further, suggesting that these bone structures could be remnants of unknown human or even non-human lineages. But beyond speculation, the discovery raises a legitimate question. What if, in the thousands of years of human evolution, there were bodily forms or variants that simply did not leave enough evidence to be recognized by conventional science? We know that the fossil record is incomplete. We know that many human species, such as Homo floresiensis and Denisova, were unknown until recently. So why not consider the possibility of exceptional individuals whose existence momentarily deviated from the usual biological pattern? The geological context of the find is also intriguing. The strata where the Castelnau bones were found dated back to the Neolithic period according to the excavation records. This was a period when agricultural communities, polished stone tools, and complex social structures already existed. If this individual did exist as described, was he part of a community, an isolated being, or the last vestige of something even older? It is also possible that the bones were misinterpreted, as was often the case in 19th century paleoanthropology. At that time, standards of preservation, measurement, and publication were very different from today. But even if the find was a mistake, it still raises a broader question about how we understand exceptions in the records of the past. Should everything that deviates from the norm be relegated to myth? Today, the Castelnau giant remains a footnote in the official history of science, an uncomfortable episode that is cited, but rarely explored in depth. And yet its echoes linger, because after all, what tells us more about ourselves than what fits into statistics or what completely defies them? And if, among the millions of skeletons that still lie underground, there is more than one that does not fit our version of history, are we prepared to find it? And if the enormous bones of Castelnau raise doubts about the limits of the human body, our next mystery is not on such a large scale, but it is disturbingly precise. A technique so refined, so strangely ahead of its time, that it has perplexed archaeologists since the day it was discovered. We travel to the vast, arid expanse of the Arabian Peninsula, where the wind sweeps away centuries of sand and the secrets of the past emerge. Today we explore the enigma of the Neolithic fluted points. In the midst of a relentless landscape of stony plains, lonely dunes, and sun-scorched hills, these objects appear as if they've been left there on purpose. Small, finely crafted projectile points with deep, symmetrical channels carved into their surface. Made of flint, obsidian, or chert, they measure no more than a few centimeters, yet they conceal a technical complexity that does not quite fit the context in which they were found. The first ones were discovered at sites in central and southern Saudi Arabia, and since then similar ones have been found in Oman, Yemen, and the United Arab Emirates. Has dated them using stratigraphy and associated carbon testing to a period ranging from approximately 800 to 5000 BC. At that time, according to known records, the human communities in the region were mainly nomadic, engaged in hunting and gathering, with limited technology and little complex social structure. So how can the existence of such a sophisticated carving technique be explained? The fluting consists of a deep, narrow groove that runs along the body of the point. To achieve this, the carver had to remove a long, thin flake without breaking the entire piece, something extremely difficult even with modern tools. The same technique is seen in North American club points, made by hunting cultures around 10,000 BC and widely recognized for their complexity. But until a few years ago, It was believed that this type of technology was unique to the American continent. The discovery of groove points in Arabia changed that narrative. The same technique was developed independently on two different continents, separated by oceans and millennia. Or perhaps there was a cultural connection that has not yet been understood, a forgotten migration, a transmission of knowledge that has left no trace other than the stone itself. The most conservative theory argues that the Arab flutes are the result of local development, possibly arising from a functional need to facilitate the insertion of the points into wooden handles or to distribute the impact when penetrating prey. However, there are those who argue that the level of skill required to carve in this way was not simply a practical response, but an expression of technical and even symbolic mastery. They could have been ritual objects, status symbols, offerings for sacred hunts rather than utilitarian tools. The remains found are not always associated with permanent settlements. Many of these points appear in isolation, far from domestic or funerary contexts, as if they had been intentionally deposited in specific places, such as crossing points, ceremonial routes, or territorial markers. No clear evidence of specialized workshops has been found, unlike other Neolithic contexts where flint cores and carving debris are found in large quantities. Sites with fluted points in Arabia show very little waste, as if production was limited, careful, even secret. This has led some researchers to consider the possibility that the craftsmen who produced these pieces were specialized individuals within their group, with knowledge that was kept secret or transmitted orally, a technical elite in the middle of the Neolithic desert. Furthermore, modern attempts to replicate these points have shown that skill alone is not enough. A detailed understanding of the material, the exact angle of percussion, and the gradual pressure applied to the stone is required. A technique that, without metal tools, seems almost impossible. What if these communities were not as primitive as we classify them from our current perspective? What if their technology, far from being an anomaly, is evidence of an intellectual tradition that is completely beyond our comprehension? Today, the debate remains open. Some defend technological coincidence, others cultural transmission through as yet unidentified routes, and a few dare to think further. What if these points are vestiges of a forgotten civilization that predates what we now understand as the Neolithic? Archaeology advances cautiously, with steady steps, but mysteries like this remind us that there are still cracks in our narrative. Small fractures through which another story seeps, a story that is not written, but carved in stone. Who were the real creators of these fluted points? And how many more lie beneath the desert sands waiting to be rediscovered? After contemplating the fine and enigmatic fluted points of the Arab Neolithic period, we now turn to the banks of the Nile, where carved stones not only told stories, but also seem to hide secrets that still perplex us today. Under the still heat of Upper Egypt, north of Luxor, stands the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, a place of engraved columns, astronomical ceilings, and reliefs that have fascinated archaeologists and mystery seekers alike for centuries. Deep within is a dimly lit chamber carved into the rock, where one of the most puzzling representations of ancient Egypt is found, what some call the Dendera lamps. Engraved in the stone of an underground crypt, the scenes show what at first glance appears to be a human figure holding an elongated bulb-shaped object from which a snake emerges. This bulb appears to be connected to a pedestal-like base or box, and inside, the snake seems to float suspended as if it were a glowing filament. Around them, other figures hold objects. They lean, observe, and there are no hieroglyphics to clearly explain the scene. This absence, this ambiguity, has opened the door to decades of debate. The traditional interpretation is that these reliefs are symbolic representations of Egyptian myths. According to this view, the bulb would be a lotus flower. The snake would represent the god Harsambis, emerging from the chalice, and the whole ensemble would illustrate a moment in the cycle of creation or cosmic renewal. But there are those who see something else. Since the 20th century, some alternative researchers have suggested a very different hypothesis, that the images at Dendera could represent a lost technology, specifically some kind of electric lighting device, an electric lamp in 3rd century Egypt. The idea may seem far-fetched. However, those who support it point to similarities with certain modern technologies. They compare the shape of the bulb to that of a light bulb. They interpret the snake as a filament and the base as a generator or power source. It has even been suggested that the Egyptians used these devices to light the interior of tombs and temples without the need for torches or oil lamps. It is true that in many ancient Egyptian monuments, there is no trace of smoke on the ceilings. The deepest chambers show no signs of soot, which has led to speculation about the existence of alternative lighting. Proponents of the electrical hypothesis argue that oil lamps would have been impractical in narrow passageways, and that the use of mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into the pyramids presents physical limitations that are difficult to overcome. But is a symbolic image enough to support such a revolutionary theory? Official Egyptology remains skeptical. The most recent studies on the iconography of Dendera insist on its mythological and ritual nature. They argue that the iconography of the temple responds to complex religious conventions, and that seeking a literal interpretation of these engravings is tantamount to misinterpreting the Egyptian worldview. However, questions remain. How did they manage to illuminate such deep spaces without leaving a trace? Why does this unique image appear only in one crypt of the temple and not in other contexts? And why does the Temple of Hathor, a center of female worship linked to fertility, medicine, and music, include such an elaborate underground chamber, closed to the public even in ancient times? Beyond the electrical hypothesis, other researchers have proposed different ideas. It could be a spiritual artifact, a sacred musical instrument, or a metaphor for the birth of divine light. The most interesting thing about the case is that there is no consensus. The image remains silent, enclosed in stone, with no inscriptions to explain its meaning. In many ways, it is a narrative void, and it is precisely this void that makes it one of the most intriguing enigmas of ancient Egypt. Even among experts, there are those who admit that the scene is unusual. Its level of detail, its specific location, and its apparent uniqueness within the Egyptian artistic corpus make it a subject of ongoing study. And perhaps that is what is most fascinating, not so much what it tells us, but what it does not tell us, because the Dendera lamps remind us that even in a civilization as studied as the Egyptian, there are still symbols that we have not been able to decipher, visual languages that escape our categories, and ancient silences that seem to have been designed to withstand the passage of time. What do the ancient priests really see in that crypt? Was it a ritual, a revelation, or a technology that disappeared without a trace? Perhaps one day, new evidence will shed light, literally or metaphorically, on the enigma. Until then, the light of Dendera remains a flash in the darkness. And if the lights of Dendera invited us to question how our ancestors illuminated the depths of knowledge and stone, now we travel to a place where the silence is even denser and the answers even scarcer. A forgotten corner of the North Atlantic, shrouded in sea mist and guarded by wind and fog. Off the coast of Massachusetts, in rough waters often closed to human passage, lies a remote and uninhabited island, no man's land, a name that in itself seems like an omen, an island belonging to no one. And yet someone left something there, carved into the rock, waiting to be seen, hidden among coastal scrub, grasslands, swept by storms and ancient shelters for migratory birds. This small piece of land, now owned by the U.S. government and converted into a protected reserve, holds a barely explored secret. A series of stones carved with enigmatic symbols and markings, whose origin, meaning, and age remain unexplained. The inscriptions, located mainly on the south coast of the island, appear on rock formations exposed to the sea. They are lines marked with force, some in circular shapes, others similar to unknown letters or pictograms. They do not follow a coherent pattern, nor do they clearly correspond to any known writing system. Who carved these signs in such an isolated place, and why? The first documented mentions of these stones date back to the 19th century, when local sailors and fishermen claimed to have seen ancient markings on the island's rocks. However, it was not until the 20th century that researchers began to take note of them. More seriously, despite several sporadic studies, no consensus interpretation has been reached. Some hypotheses suggest that they could have been made by indigenous peoples, possibly the Wampanoag or their ancestors as part of a ritual or navigational tradition. However, the symbols do not entirely match the style or iconography typical of the region's native cultures. Others point to Viking sailors. The similarities, according to some proponents of this theory, are found in certain lines reminiscent of Scandinavian runes. This could have been a point of contact before the landing in Newfoundland, a stopover on now-lost routes. Then there are the more daring, who see in these marks traces of much older travelers, even pre-Columbian, who would have reached North America from Europe, Africa, or the Mediterranean centuries before Columbus. Although marginal, this theory has gained attention in alternative circles, especially since there is no clear explanation as to why these marks are there on an island where there are no records of permanent settlements. But the mystery does not end there. No Man's Land Island was used for decades as a military training area. Since World War II, it has been the scene of bombing, shooting exercises, and ballistic tests. This activity restricted access for years and meant that much of the land is still considered dangerous due to the presence of unexploded ordnance. This has greatly hampered archaeological investigations. Many parts of the island remain inaccessible, and the inscribed stones, exposed to erosion, sea salt, and the passage of time, are slowly disappearing without anyone being able to study them in detail. What if the inscriptions are much older than we think? What if they are part of a completely lost symbolic system? Or are they perhaps a warning, a mark of territory, a message left by someone who knew that their history would be left out of the books? The mystery of No Man's Land is not limited to the inscriptions. The entire island is a kind of suspended territory, forgotten, with no clear narrative. There are no visible remains of structures, tools, or human bones, only the marks and the emptiness. A paradox, a place that cannot be entered and that seems to have left no answers behind. The little we know is not enough. And in the meantime, the sea continues to beat against the rocks, the moss advances, the cracks deepen, the inscriptions wear away, as if time itself wanted to erase the message. Before we can understand it, who wrote on the stone on the island of no one? And what did they want to tell us? Was it a ritual gesture, a secret map, or the last vestige of a history we have already forgotten? Perhaps the answers are still there waiting for someone to look at those stones again, not as insignificant fragments, but as the last words of a lost language. And if the engraved stones on the island of no one confronted us with the silence of the unexplained on the margins of the Atlantic, we now enter the vast deserts of southeastern Iran, where the sand is hidden for millennia, an ancient city that burns without fire, a place christened by modern archaeologists with an unsettling name, Shark, the Burnt City. At first glance, it is a dusty and extensive site located next to the Helmand River, in the arid region of Sistan and Baluchistan. But beneath its parched surface, this city hides stories that challenge what we thought we knew about the ancient civilizations of the Near East. Sharaq was founded around 3200 BC, at a time when other great cities, such as Uruk and Mohenjo-daro, were flourishing. And yet, its architectural style, urban planning, and cultural complexity are unlike any of its contemporaries. It was a sophisticated city with straight streets, administrative structures, specialized workshops, and even a rudimentary sewer system. But the most surprising thing is what its inhabitants left behind. Among the most astonishing finds, archaeologists discovered what is believed to be the world's first prosthetic eye, made of bitumen and plant fibers, found in the skull of a woman who was buried more than 4,800 years ago. A skull with clear signs of brain surgery was also found, a trepanation performed with a precision that still baffles experts today. Perhaps even more intriguing is a ceramic vessel that, when spun quickly, generates a Sequential animation of a goat jumping to reach the branches of a tree. This is the first example of animation in human history. Every discovery in Sharked seems to whisper a story that does not quite fit the official narrative. How could such an advanced society have developed in such a remote place, far from the great centers known at the time? And why did it disappear so suddenly? The name Burnt City comes from the fact that it was destroyed and rebuilt several times. Each cycle was marked by massive fires, the origin of which remains a mystery. There are no signs of war, no traces of invasions, and yet the archaeological levels show clear signs of destruction by fire, as if the city had been razed by internal, unknown, or even natural causes. Were these fires part of a symbolic cycle of destruction and rebirth? Or do they reflect catastrophes beyond human control? Some researchers have put forward theories about possible ecological disasters, the collapse of the river, extreme droughts, or health problems resulting from rapid urban growth. Others believe that it could be a cultural phenomenon where the city was deliberately abandoned and burned after certain periods. But all this only deepens the mystery, because what is also puzzling is its level of intellectual development. The remains recovered point to a society with a complex social structure. Hundreds of dice, game boards, ivory combs, delicate jewelry, and rudimentary medical tools have been found. And traces of surprisingly advanced economic activity have been discovered in the archives of their homes. Was Sharked an independent city that developed its knowledge in parallel with other civilizations, or was it part of a wider network that we have not yet fully identified? Some archaeologists suggest that it may have been an important trading hub between the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and the Persian Gulf. And yet, the ceramic styles, burial patterns, and tools show a distinct identity. Inscriptions have also been found in a language that has not yet been deciphered, possibly local, which bears no direct relation to cuneiform or Indo-Aryan writing. A lost language, a culture that flourished on the blind side of our historical narratives. Perhaps the most disturbing thing is not what we have discovered, but what we still do not understand, because Sharked seems to be a civilization that lived between the visible and the hidden, leaving tangible traces of intelligence and creativity, but no clear voice to explain its origin or its end. A city that burned more than once, and yet has reemerged centuries later from the sand. What knowledge was lost within its blackened walls? And how many stories are still waiting to be unearthed? Perhaps Sequoia. Perhaps we are only now beginning to see the smoke. From the burning sands of Sharked, where history burns among the ruins, we now travel to a place where the jungle hides secrets beneath layers of earth and oblivion. On the other side of the world, in northeastern Brazil, there is a stone that has raised more questions than answers. An enigmatic inscription carved on a slab that, if authentic, could rewrite the history of contact between ancient civilizations. We are in the state of Paraíba, near the city of João Pessoa. In 1872, in the middle of a still, little explored forest region, a local farmer found what appeared to be a huge rock with strange markings. It caught the attention of researchers, and soon after, the contents of that stone shocked scholars. A text supposedly written in Phoenician letters, a language that, according to the books, should never have appeared in South America. The text was quickly translated by some experts of the time. It told the story of a group of Phoenician sailors who, after setting sail from Sidon around the 6th century BC, were blown off course by a storm. They sailed for weeks through unknown waters until they reached a distant and lush land, rich in trees and water. Some men decided to settle there, while others attempted to return to inform their king. But is this possible? If the Paraíba inscription is authentic, it would provide direct evidence that the Phoenicians, the ultimate traders and navigators of the Mediterranean, reached America more than 2,000 years before Columbus. The magnitude of such a claim aroused skepticism from many from the outset. Official historians quickly declared the inscription a forgery. They alleged linguistic inconsistencies, grammatical errors, and the fact that the stone could not be physically examined, as it mysteriously disappeared shortly after its discovery. All that remains today is a handwritten copy of the original text, and a controversy that has never ceased. However, over the decades, other scholars, linguists, epigraphers, and even independent archaeologists have questioned the initial rejection. Some claim that the errors in the inscription are not proof of falsification, but possibly a reflection of a regional dialect or a late Phoenician adaptation. Others wonder if it was a forgery. Who could have made it in a rural and remote area of Brazil in the 19th century, with such specific knowledge of the Phoenician language that even today is only mastered by a minority of specialists? There are also those who see parallels with accounts by the Greek historian Herodotus, who mentioned Phoenician expeditions around the African continent on behalf of Egyptian pharaohs. And if any of those voyages ended up straying further west towards the Atlantic, and if by accident or necessity they reached the American coast. Of course, more speculative theories have also emerged: lost civilizations, ancient nautical knowledge, forgotten sea routes, theories that, without concrete evidence, remain on the border between possibility and imagination. But what keeps the mystery of the Paraíba inscription alive is not only the carved words, but the absence of conclusive evidence to confirm or disprove it definitively. The rock has not been found since then, and its existence is a myth for some, while for others it is a crucial fragment of a history that has been forcibly buried. Is it possible that explorers from the ancient Mediterranean reached South America without the rest of the world knowing? Or are we dealing with an elaborate hoax that was too far ahead of its time? Today, more than 150 years later, the controversy continues. Brazilian and foreign universities have reignited the debate, driven by discoveries of other objects with strange writings in America and a renewed openness to revisiting dominant historical narratives. And yet, without the original stone, the debate remains in the realm of reasoned speculation. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about the case is how a simple slab, now gone, managed to shake up the story of the origins and ancient voyages. As an inscription, real or not, it continues to force us to ask ourselves what we really know about the past and what doors could be opened if we accepted that history, as we know it, may have much deeper gaps than we imagine. And if other stones like this one are still waiting to be discovered, covered by the jungle, time, or the fear of changing the status quo. Perhaps in some corner of the continent, a new inscription is waiting, ready to tell us a story that we are not yet prepared to accept. And while the tropical coasts of Brazil whisper stories of lost sailors and ancient languages on vanished stones, the echo of mystery now leads us to the heart of Western Anatolia. There, among gentle hills overlooking the Sea of Marmara, lay a city that for centuries was a crossroads of cultures and imperial secrets. Daski. Today, only dusty ruins and the remains of walls mark the presence of what was once an important administrative center of the Persian Empire during its rule over Asia Minor. But beneath this silent appearance, Daski Leon harbors an even deeper enigma, one that revolves around a set of ancient documents, the Dascalon archives. In 1954, a team of Turkish archaeologists was excavating near Lake Monas when they came across what appeared to be a series of clay tablets carefully buried under layers of earth. At first, they did not attract much attention. They were fragments worn by time, but upon closer inspection, something unexpected was revealed. The tablets were written in Imperial Aramaic, a language widely used by scribes in the Achaemenid Empire. And what they contained were not mere notes, but administrative records, contracts, tax accounts, fragments of a meticulous and advanced bureaucracy that operated on the border between East and West. But this is where the intrigue begins, because among the records that the archaeologists managed to preserve and translate, there were vague but constant references to lost documents, seals that have not been recovered, and names of scribes unknown from other sources. Where's the rest of this archive? Was it destroyed, or does it still lie hidden under unexcavated layers? Some researchers believe that the complete Dascalon archives can be found in unexplored underground chambers, protected for centuries by erosion and changes in the level of the nearby lake. Others think that they were deliberately hidden or moved during the subsequent conflicts between the Persians, Macedonians, and local kingdoms. And the most puzzling thing is what they might contain, because these archives did not only record the accounts of a Persian satrapy. Daski was for a time a kind of cultural hinge between Greece, Persia, and the world of the ancient peoples of Anatolia. It is possible that these documents contain key information about army movements, diplomatic pacts, or even secret treaties that we have no record of in Greek sources. What's more, the few texts that have been recovered show an almost obsessive precision in their language, with added symbols that do not entirely correspond to traditional Aramaic, a local variant, a code, or a double entry system to hide certain information from unauthorized eyes. Some philologists have suggested that these symbols could be linked to an esoteric system, an administrative script, intended only for the imperial elite. Others, more cautious, prefer to speak of simple copying errors or a poorly documented regional style. However, the idea that there was a secret archive in Daskion, a set of documents reserved for a limited circle of officials, is not far-fetched. In other parts of the Persian Empire, evidence has been found of double archives, one visible and one hidden, as if there were two levels of control. And if the same happened here. In addition, some local archaeologists claim to have detected anomalies underground using ground-penetrating radar techniques, rectangular cavities aligned with each other, whose shape and size match known document repositories in other regions of the ancient world. But for budgetary and political reasons, these areas have not yet been excavated. What might be waiting beneath the ground at Daski Leon? If the complete archives ever emerge, they could transform our understanding of how the power systems of the Persian Empire operated on its margins. They could reveal unrecorded pacts, names of lost cities, forgotten trade routes, or even the echoes of civilizations that we can only guess at through fragments. For now, we only have those few tablets, silent witnesses to a complex, powerful, and largely invisible bureaucratic network. Are we looking at the marginal remains of a larger archive that was destroyed, or the tip of a documentary iceberg yet to be discovered? And if a carefully sealed secret archive still lies beneath Daskion? For more than 2 millennia, what truths does it hold? And while the sands of Anatolia silently guard the secrets of buried archives, the waters of the Far East hide even older and more unfathomable enigmas, because sometimes it is not the earth, but the ocean that protects the deepest mysteries of history. Hundreds of kilometers off the coast of Taiwan, beneath the turbulent waters of the strait separating the island from the Asian continent, lie submerged formations that for years were ignored by official science. Known as the Yonaguni sister structures, these formations seem to reflect, like an underwater echo, the same enigmatic patterns found off the Japanese island of the same name. But what exactly are the Yonaguni structures discovered in the 1980s near Okinawa that have generated decades of debate? Some claim they're the result of natural geological processes. Others see them as the remains of a lost civilization, perhaps wiped out by a catastrophe thousands of years ago. What is disturbing is that similar structures have been located under the waters of the Taiwan Strait, in an area that is difficult to access due to strong currents and geopolitical tensions in the region. There, at depths ranging from 20 to 40 meters, independent researchers and local divers have documented alignments of rectangular blocks, step terraces, right angles, and what appear to be carved stairways. All of this is sculpted into the bedrock of the seabed. It could be a simple geological coincidence. The formations appear to follow patterns that are too symmetrical, too precise, to be solely the work of marine chance. And yet, scientific authorities remain cautious. The area has been barely explored officially, and existing documentation is scarce, often obtained by explorers not affiliated with academic institutions. Some geologists argue that the region is composed of sandstone and limestone, prone to fracturing into straight lines and smooth surfaces, giving rise to shapes that may appear artificial without being so. But proponents of the alternative theory point to another issue: distribution. because we are not talking about a single formation, but several clusters distributed at different points, all with similar orientations and proportions. In addition, some areas show signs of erosion that, according to certain estimates, could date back to periods prior to 8,000 years ago. When the sea level was tens of meters lower. And if these structures have been built or at least used by human communities before the end of the last glaciation. In that case, we would be faced with a completely unknown prehistoric coastal civilization whose traces would have been swallowed up by rising oceans. It would be a parallel history to our own, a civilization wiped out not by wars or empires, but by water. It is possible that what lies beneath the Taiwan Strait was once a series of ritual or port settlements, a network of interconnected structures that were part of a larger culture spread across the Western Pacific. There are legends in both Taiwan and Japan that tell of sunken lands, of cities submerged by the sea after great cataclysms. But as with so many ancient tales, it is difficult to separate myth from possible historical memory. Some researchers have compared these structures to the truncated pyramids of Mesoamerica or the platforms of Nanmadol in Micronesia. The repetition of stepped geometric shapes, the cardinal orientation, the use of large blocks, all suggest a common logic. Truncated pyramids of Mesoamerica or the platforms of Nanmadol in Micronesia. The repetition of stepped geometric shapes, the cardinal orientation, and the use of large blocks all suggest a common logic. But do human cultures discover the same patterns over and over again when they build? Or could there have been more contact than we think between peoples separated by thousands of kilometers? Of course, without direct excavations, detailed analysis of materials, and a clear archaeological context, everything remains a hypothesis. And yet, the sea, as generous as it is unforgiving, rarely gives up its secrets easily. Exploration attempts are sporadic. The underwater terrain is dangerous. Access is limited by geopolitical interests, and investment in marine archaeology is scarce. But every image obtained by drone, every visual testimony recorded by a diver, adds another piece to the puzzle. What really lies hidden beneath the waters of the Taiwan Strait? Are these blocks and terraces a geological coincidence or forgotten fragments of a world that came before ours? And if these sister structures to Yonaguni are real, if they were built by human hands more than 10,000 years ago, then the history of humanity could be deeper and more submerged than we ever dared to imagine. Perhaps we just need to look with different eyes. Perhaps the ocean floor still echoes with the voices of civilizations that time simply could not erase. And while the sea covers ancient secrets in the depths of the Taiwan Strait, on the other side of the world, ice has preserved an equally puzzling legacy, one that lies not beneath the waves, but beneath centuries of Siberian permafrost. In the cold and desolate plains of the Altai, where winters last more than half the year and the wind is unforgiving, archaeologists have discovered human bodies perfectly preserved in ice for more than 2,000 years. These are the mummies of Passaic, belonging to a nomadic culture that lived in this region between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. But it is not the bodies that have caused the most amazement, it is the tattoos. Under the skin hardened by time, clear shapes can still be distinguished. Winged deer, hybrid creatures, monsters with piercing bird claws. The designs are not only artistic, but also symbolic. The tattoos cover arms, shoulders, and even fingers, and seem to form a visual language that we have not yet been able to fully decipher. What did these symbols represent? Experts agree that the tattoos were not mere ornaments. They may have indicated social status, ritual function, or tribal identity. But some figures defy classification. Non-existent beasts in geometric positions that seem to have come out of a dream or a vision. One of the most enigmatic tattoos on the arm of a woman, nicknamed the Ice Lady, shows a deer with spiral antlers, fused with parts of a bird and a feline. Is it art or coded cosmology? The mummies were found in burial mounds known as kurgans covered by stone cairns. The extreme cold and frozen water inside the tombs acted as a natural time capsule. Thanks to this, not only were bodies and tattoos preserved, but also fabrics, carved wood, sacrificed horses, and even traces of cannabis, suggesting shamanic ceremonies or visionary rituals. But the big question remains, what was the deeper meaning of these tattoos? Were they spiritual maps, mythological stories, or marks of secret knowledge passed down from generation to generation? Some more daring theories, although not without interest, suggest that these symbols could be part of a mystical tradition shared by various Eurasian cultures, from China to India. In fact, certain motifs found in Pasiric tattoos bear a striking resemblance to symbols carved in rock art much further south, in the mountains of Kazakhstan and Mongolia. Coincidence or cultural connection via routes now forgotten. Chinese chroniclers of the Han Dynasty already mentioned the northern peoples as skilled horsemen covered with dark marks on their skin. Herodotus, for his part, spoke of nomadic tribes who adorned their bodies with animal figures to invoke their strength. But in no case is there mention of a system as elaborate and detailed as the one we see in the Altai mummies. We could be looking at a primitive form of body writing or a visual language reserved for initiates. Many of the tattoos are located in areas of the body that were not visible in traditional clothing. This suggests that their function was internal, perhaps spiritual rather than public. Some archaeologists suggest that they were maps of the soul, symbolic guides to the afterlife. Others relate them to healing or magical practices. And then there is silence, because the Pathic culture disappeared without leaving a written language, temples, or monuments. Only tomb after tomb, and inside them bodies marked with signs that we still do not understand. The mystery deepens when we consider that many of these designs have been replicated by later cultures, from the Armada to the Uyghurs and the Tuchik peoples. Some motifs have even made their way into Central Asian folklore. Direct inheritance? Or do these symbols touch something deeper in the human psyche? Today, tattoos have regained their place in modern culture, but when we contemplate them in passive, we see neither fashion nor trend. We see beliefs, a worldview, perhaps an attempt to narrate with the skin what could not be said with words. What were these peoples trying to convey with their tattooed bodies? What secrets of the cosmos or the spirit did they represent with such strange figures? And above all, how many more remain hidden under the ice, waiting to be found? Perhaps one day a new excavation will reveal a clue. Or perhaps, as so often happens with true mysteries, the answer is right in front of us, drawn on ancient flesh, but still beyond our reach. Let's keep exploring. And while the marks on the frozen skin of the Altai mummies continue to whisper secrets we cannot yet decipher, we now head for the most inhospitable high plateau in Asia, where an even deeper silence lies buried between the mountains and the wind. At an altitude of over 4,000 meters, on the border between China and Tibet, lies Dillon County. A arid steppe landscape crossed by glacial rivers and surrounded by snow-capped peaks. Here, in this hostile and desolate environment, archaeologists discovered one of the most enigmatic burials on the Asian continent. A royal tomb with more than 200 sacrificed horses, carefully arranged around a burial mound. This is the Dillon Horse Burial Site, dating from between the 6th century and the Tang Dynasty. The discovery was as unexpected as it was puzzling. The horses were not simply thrown into the pit. Each one had been placed with precision, as if their arrangement were part of a larger ritual, perhaps a choreography for eternity. Who deserved such an extraordinary tribute? The main tomb contained the remains of a high-ranking individual, possibly a king or queen of the Tuyuhun Kingdom, a little-documented semi-nomadic culture located between the Chinese Empire and the Tibetan world. Gold objects, silks, bronze mirrors, and ceremonial weapons were found alongside the body. But it was the jade ring on the deceased's finger that further fueled the mystery. A symbol of power, yes, but also perhaps of belonging to a forgotten lineage. Horses in Central Asian culture have always been emblems of prestige, mobility, and connection to the spiritual world. But 200 horses? What kind of journey was being prepared for the afterlife? Was it a sacrifice to honor a beloved leader, or part of a darker ritual? Some experts have suggested that the burial is related to shamanic practices, where horses would act as guides for the soul on its journey to the other world. Others suggest that it could be an attempt to replicate the splendor of an army in the afterlife, a mounted funeral court destined to protect and serve its lord eternally. And there are those who go even further. In analyzing the bones, archaeologists discovered something unusual. Many of the horses were young, strong specimens with no signs of disease or old age. They had been carefully selected, not out of necessity, but for their perfection. And in some skulls, precise perforations were found, as if they had been executed according to a common, ritualized method. What beliefs demanded such a meticulous sacrifice? The Tuyuhun culture, although little known, left a fleeting but intense mark on the history of the region. They are believed to have been heirs to a mixture of Xiongnu, Tibetan, and Chinese traditions, but there are hardly any written documents about them, except for scattered mentions in imperial chronicles. Their cities vanished, their temples disappeared, and only tombs like Dullin's allow us to glimpse fragments of what they once were. And if this burial were not an isolated event, what if other tombs with similar secrets still lie beneath the frozen ground of the high plateau? Analysis of the textiles found revealed patterns that were not typical of either Chinese silk or Tibetan fabrics. Some drawings are reminiscent of Sasanian motifs, while others mysteriously display symbols similar to those found in Scythian tombs thousands of kilometers to the northwest. We are faced with evidence of a cultural network much more extensive than we imagined. Furthermore, the geometric arrangement of the horses around the tomb has led some to wonder whether it followed an astronomical pattern. Was it a ritual alignment with constellations? Was it perhaps a celestial map traced with bodies? Nothing in Dullin seems to be the result of chance. Excavations continue, but each discovery raises new questions rather than answers. And the environment, so remote and extreme, seems reluctant to reveal its secrets. Snowstorms, unpredictable winds, isolation. Everything contributes to creating an atmosphere in which time seems to have stood still, as if the earth still jealously protects the remains of a culture that preferred to be forgotten. Why did the kingdom of Tuyuhun disappear? Was it assimilated, destroyed, or did it simply vanish like so many other nomadic kingdoms in Central Asia? And even more disturbing, how many stories have been lost under the tundra? How many burials like Dullin's remain to be discovered? In the end, all we can do is look at these remains with humility, because the silence of the horses and those who buried them continues to speak, only we do not yet know how to listen. Let's keep going. The mystery continues. And while the echo of the horses sacrificed in Dullin fades away among the peaks of the Asian highlands, our steps now lead us to the heart of the ancient Levant. There, where the stones still whisper languages that no one has yet been able to fully decipher. In northwestern Syria, very close to the border with Turkey, stand the remains of the ancient temple of Indara. Among arid hills and ancient olive groves, this black basalt construction seems to defy time. Although much of the temple was destroyed in recent years, what still survives, engraved in stone and silence, is enough to raise questions that border on the inexplicable. Indara was built between the 10th and 1st centuries BC. Its proportions and architectural layout have reminded many of the mythical Temple of Solomon described in the Hebrew Scriptures. In fact, the similarities between the two, the dimensions, the columns, and the entrances have led some archaeologists to wonder if the biblical architects could have been inspired by it. But the most enigmatic thing about Indara is not in its walls or its layout, it is in its details. Right at the main entrance, carved directly into the stone floor, are two enormous footprints, each over a meter long. It is as if a gigantic, perhaps divine creature had stepped into the temple. And they are not alone. A few meters away are two other footprints facing inward. They symbolize the footsteps of a deity an entrance ritual, or are vestiges of a forgotten local myth. The footprints are not the only thing that is puzzling. Along the walls and columns are reliefs of figures with covered faces, expressionless masks that hide the identity of those who were carved. Some wear elaborate headdresses, others wings or astral symbols. But in all of them, there is a disturbing constant: the absence of a direct gaze. No one seems to be watching us. They all look away. Who are these masked beings? Priests? Temple guardians? The inscriptions that could provide context for these figures are fragmented or completely lost, and what little remains has been the subject of intense debate among historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists. Some argue that the masks represent the sacred, that which cannot be seen directly. Others think they are a form of ritual anonymity, as if human faces were not worthy of being shown before the divine. But there are also more speculative theories. Some alternative scholars suggest that Indara was a kind of spiritual contact center, a meeting point between the human and the non-human. They point out that the proportions of the footprints and figures do not correspond to normal beings. They add that the symmetry of the reliefs, the non-human proportions, and the astronomical iconography could indicate a completely different worldview from the one we know. And this is where the mystery deepens, because Indara is not alone. Throughout the Fertile Crescent, there are other ancient structures such as Tel Halaf, Alalak, and Jobkli Teep that also feature humanoid carvings, masks, and star symbols. Are we looking at a religious tradition that is older than we think? Or are these remnants of a civilization that has not yet been officially recognized? The history of Ainara is further complicated by its recent destruction. In 2018, part of the temple was bombed and severely damaged. Many of its inscriptions, statues, and reliefs were pulverized, an irreversible loss, and with it perhaps key fragments to understanding its true meaning. But even amid the rubble, questions remain. What power did those masks have? What rituals were performed between those columns? Who is sacred or feared enough to leave their footprints engraved in stone? The mystery of Indara lies not only in what has been lost, but in what remains unexplained, in that combination of beauty, geometry, and symbolism that seems to speak a language we have forgotten, and in that silent feeling that we still do not understand the whole story, not even a part of it. Because if the gods ever walked among us, is this where they left their mark, or are we simply seeing what we want to see in the shadows of the past? We continue to explore. History, like the stones of Ainara, still holds its secrets. And while the masks of Ainara seem to hide truths we will never know, we now travel further east to an ancient language that, although spoken for centuries, remains one of the most enigmatic ever recorded. In the arid landscape of present-day southwestern Iran, among the ruins of forgotten temples and palaces half buried by the dust of time, a civilization flourished. Civilization that the Greeks called Elam, a land of kings, dark gods, complex alliances, and rivalries with Babylon, Sumer, and Assyria. But the most puzzling thing they left behind is not a tomb, a city, or even an artifact. It is a language. The Elamite language, recorded on clay tablets in cuneiform script, was used for over 1,000 years, from approximately 2,800 to 550 BC. It appears in treatises, royal inscriptions, and administrative documents. And yet, the most disturbing thing is this. We don't really know where it came from or what other languages it is related to, because Elamite is an isolated language, meaning it has no known relatives and does not belong to the Indo-European, Semitic, or Dravidian language families. It is like a voice without an echo, a language that emerged, lasted for over a millennium, and disappeared without leaving any heirs. What does that mean? How can a language last so long and have no connection to any other known language? Linguists have tried to find relationships, connections, clues. Some have suggested that it could be related to the Dvadic languages of southern India. Others have proposed even bolder theories. What if it comes from a migrant people that predates the Mesopotamian civilizations? Elamita reflects a much older history of humanity, buried under layers of oblivion. One of the best-known texts in Elamita is the Based-on inscription, a decree by King Darius I of Persia, written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamita, Babylonian, and Elamite. It was key to deciphering cuneiform systems, but even with that help, many grammatical structures of Elamite remain an enigma. Words are known, basic phrases can be translated, but the nuances, the poetry, the deep thought that every language conveys remain beyond our reach. How did the Elamites think? What words did they use to talk about love, death, eternity? And if this language has no relatives, where did those who spoke it come from? It could be a vestige of a civilization that predates writing, whose cultural traces were lost, but whose language managed to survive longer. Some archaeologists point out that the Elamite region was inhabited long before the emergence of the great Mesopotamian cultures. Places such as Susa, the capital of Elam, show layers of occupation dating back to the 5th millennium BC. Could Elite be the last voice of a world before history as we know it? Others go even further, pointing to the possibility that this language comes from a lineage completely independent of known peoples, as if at the dawn of civilization there had been a network of cultures that never consolidated or were absorbed by later empires, and that Elita is one of the few surviving evidence of that lost diversity. Of course, these ideas remain speculative, but the persistence of the language, its isolation, and its disappearance without a direct legacy invite the question: how much of human history remains buried in words we cannot understand? Today, in museums, the tablets in the Amida rest in silent display cases. Their symbols, precisely engraved thousands of years ago, seem to want to speak to us, but their voice remains trapped in a wall of incomprehension. Sometimes the mystery is not in what is hidden, but in what is clearly displayed, and yet we cannot decipher. And if Elamite is just one of many forgotten languages, and if there are other writings, other ways of thinking that have disappeared without a trace, we could be ignoring crucial fragments of our own origins. Words have the power to preserve civilizations, but when their meanings are lost, all that remains is an echo, a whisper that travels through the centuries, waiting to be heard again.